and welcome to Them's Writin Words, a podcast discussing selected fanfictions from the world of pastel horse literature. My name is Scribbler, and I will be your moderator today. Joining me for this discussion, we have Goombasa.
Hi there, ho there.
Illya Leonov.
Hello, everyone.
Neighrator.
Hello there.
And Thornquill.
Hello, everyone.
And today we will be looking at my pick for our fanfic, My Roommate Jumped the Shark. No, wait, my roommate is a vampire. My Roommate is a Vampire by Dennis the Menace. A choice I regret in retrospect, if only because picking blind turned out to not be a good idea for an in-depth fic discussion. The synopsis reads, there was only one explanation for all of it. All of the strange, erratic behaviour, her irrational fear of the sun, her nocturnal habits of locking herself in the dark and closing all the blinds, wearing her sunglasses everywhere, even inside. It was time to invest in some silver, garlic, and a wooden stake. The story was published between 5th of July 2012 and 15th of October 2012 and clocks in at 54,598 words. And I managed to get through all that without telling everybody to fuck off.
We'll get there.
Well done.
I mean, we can get there right now if you want. I can get out of the way. Fuck off, all of you. There we go. Tradition gone. Yeah. Oh no, I take it back.
We came so close,
I take it
and
back.
then we fell back into the depths.
I don't like that noise Narrator just made. I feel mean now.
No, it's like, oh, you do love me. You told me to fuck off.
Oh my god.
Okay, all right then. Okay, so this particular story is what we would characterize as a fandom classic. That was mainly the reason I chose it, is because I'd never read it before. I'd always meant to, and I figured this would be a way to kind of force myself to do that. Warning for the next fic picker, don't do that. Absolutely don't do that. It's not a good thing to do, because if it turns out that you're not a big fan of the story you've chosen, you might end up in a podcast with a lot of people trying to justify why you chose something and having no real justification other than, I was curious. So...
we might be giving everyone the wrong impression so far. It's not that we didn't like the fic. It's that I definitely didn't have a good idea of what I was getting into at the start.
Yeah.
I think you didn't either.
That's the main thing, is that I didn't really know what this story was going to be. It is, I'll say right now, it's a bit of a problematic story. It is not by any means a totally bad story, but it is problematic, and we'll get into the reasons why. But if you choose to read this before you listen to our podcast, be aware of that it has problems. So the synopsis does not really say who these what this is actually about. It's about Octoscratch, which, that's one of the main reasons I picked it as well. But the tags are romance, adventure, and comedy. Do we believe that they are accurate? Goombasa?
Romance, yeah, I can see that. Adventure, no. Comedy, sometimes.
Illya?
Absolutely. I agree with every one of them.
Neighrator?
Yes, I'm fine with the tags. I have other problems with the story, but the tags are okay.
I was damned by fake praise there. Thornquill?
Well, the tags, given that they apply to such a broad range of subjects within themselves, yes, they do apply here. But yeah, they also, like you already hinted at, they don't really give as complete an idea of what this fic is as they should. So they apply, and yet they don't.
See, I think that romance and comedy do fit. I wish it had said action, not adventure, because I would not characterize this as an adventure story, but I would definitely characterize it as an action, quite possibly a thriller. But,
agreed.
Yeah, I think the adventure tag is maybe a little broad for this.
I think the adventure part comes in the espionage portion of the story. It's sort of
Maybe.
They have adventures that aren't action.
I suppose, but adventures that aren't action fall into slice of life, don't they?
Well, yes, but this had both.
Goombasa, you wanted to add something?
I just think that the way that Scribbler outlined it before with action and thriller, that would have described the espionage portion a little bit better than adventure, I feel, because adventure has a very grandiose connotation to it. I'm not saying that it has to be indicative of like a hero's journey story, but it carries with it a certain expectation, which I think we've gone over before. How certain words or certain tags make you think certain things will happen in the story. So yeah, I do think that action or thriller would have been a better descriptor for a tag rather than adventure.
Is thriller a tag, a real one that they use?
I think it is now. I don't think it was at the time of Story's publication.
It should be noted that, like Scribbler pointed out, this was published over the course of the summer and autumn of 2012. This was in between seasons 2 and 3.
Thornquill,
God,
you
I
had
feel
something to say? Thorny, you were going to say something?
I was just going to add, I didn't even know there was an action tag. Like right now, I just learned this. So
See, our podcast is educational in between all the dick jokes.
I also did not know action was a tag. That's how long it's been since I've published my own fic. But yeah, if action is now an option, I would have definitely agreed that action fits better than adventure.
So you've just reminded me that, oh damn it, I've forgotten to post that part of the story again. I have a story that's been written since last year and I keep forgetting to post. Because I wrote it for a patron and therefore it's just been sitting on my Google Drive like shouting at me going, can you post me please? Post me, I like it.
Wow.
Right, okay, summary of the story itself. I guess since this is my pick, it's my job to try and summarize this beast.
Yeah, good luck.
don't I know it? Poor choices were made. Yeah, this story is an Octoscratch. It begins with Octavia moving in with a roommate for as yet undisclosed reasons. It turns out that her roommate has some very strange behaviors, which Octavia, in rather a short amount of time, decides, does that mean she's a vampire? Rather than, is she an emo? Is she a goth? Is she just a part of some new age lifestyle? No, vampire. We're going for vampire. Okay then, Octavia. It is told entirely in Octavia's point of view, so we learn things when she does. Turns out Vinyl is a vampire. You can tell that from the description. They fall in love, have smoochies and kisses, and depending on your interpretation, it either gets very action-oriented or completely and utterly shits the bed. And there's a secret society, there are terrorists, there is espionage, there are plots, there are evil exes, there is a vampiric princess, and by the end, it's all become one big hodgepodge in a pot. Do you reckon that's vague enough?
Yeah, that'll do.
slightly spoilery, but I think it's as good as we're going to get.
You can't describe the story very much without being spoilery. It just isn't possible.
No.
Well, not without mischaracterizing the story, and I think that's made one of the major problems we have with it, is that without going into any spoilers whatsoever, you can completely mischaracterize what this story is going to be. It's not just an Octoscratch vampire romance.
I kind of feel like the synopsis that you gave is what people who don't read fan fiction think all fan fiction is like.
God damn it, you're right. Also, you know what I've just realized? The latter half of that description also fits my immortal. Yeah, the idea of espionage, there's vampires, werewolves, a love story, a big mishmash in a pot. I mean, in fact, no, I was about to say the only thing this story is missing is sex, but that happens too.
I mean, if you give the synopsis of The Lord of the Rings as a party goes on a quest to defeat an ancient evil, that doesn't sound very good either.
Dragon Quest?
I want Dragon Quest to be a movie.
They're making one.
Well, they're making a sort of pilot-y bit. They're not making the actual movie yet. They're making a demo reel. Not quite the same thing. But I want the actual movie. So everyone go and support Dragon Quest. Sorry, gagging for a second there. I'm fine. Right, okay.
I'm glad to hear that.
I've been poorly over the weekend. I kind of overworked myself again like an idiot. So, yeah, fine.
Been poorly is British for made herself slightly ill.
Yeah. I think we're assuming that I leave in the fact that I was just gagging away from the microphone. That's one thing I might actually clip out of our podcast.
I was just defining it in case.
Considering Britishism seems to have been the theme of our discussion before this podcast.
Very frequently.
Mm-hmm. Right, so from this point in, we're going to have spoilers because we can't really discuss much of this fic without giving away large portions of the plot. Speak now, forever hold your peace, bugger off and go and read it, or listen to us wax lyrical about it. Okay? Okay. So, genre and audience expectations. And this has been edited by Thorny. When tags aren't enough, are we able to conclude what this story is, and does that change the criteria by which we judge it? So, Thorny, you want to take this one?
Sure. And I thought this one was pretty important to lead with, just because it's very difficult to decide exactly what this story is and what it wants to be. And if we don't know that, and we're judging it by something it completely is not, that is kind of unfair. It's like kind of the example that I thought of was for Crimson Peak. Crimson Peak is one of my favorite movies of all time, and it absolutely bombed
Is that the Guillermo del Toro one with Tom Hiddleston?
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
Okay.
And it absolutely bombed in the United States because when they went to sell the movie, they marketed it as, a straight up shock horror film. Paranormal Activity was huge at the time, and so they marketed it as another Paranormal Activity, jump scares and all that stuff.
I can see how that'd be problematic.
And so people went to see the movie expecting, your typical American horror film and how those are filmed and all that. And so, of course, they hated it because they went in expecting one thing, and Crimson Peak is an entirely different film. I always tell people when recommending it, it's not a horror film, it's a gothic romance. So it has horror in it, but it's also a completely different genre. And I find people like the movie a lot more when they've been told that than when they're expecting a horror film. So I kind of feel like this story, kind of the thing I'm thinking of is that it definitely has a problem. And I'm thinking the problem is that it might fail to clue people in as to what kind of story the author was creating when they sat down to create it.
You might be onto something there.
One of the questions I had was, what were, just like a quick little round table, what were our expectations going into this story? And if we can, because it's been a little while, maybe try to piece together how we came by those expectations, because I'll just lead on that. I was kind of an idiot, and I started reading this story, and I didn't even look at the tags. I didn't see comedy in there at all. So my interpretation was entirely based on Fandom Classic and the cover art style. So I was kind of expecting something a little more serious take, a little more literary, playing, throw some pony into the vampire tropes, have some fun with it, but also taking it somewhat seriously. And it was very clear to me, very quickly, on a few lines of dialogue, that either this story was horrible or I had gotten something terribly wrong. And I was curious what everyone else's impressions were going into the story and kind of what maybe our expectations came from.
I'll go next if I may.
You may indeed.
So yeah, I think Thorny's onto something there, and just like from the tags and from the cover art, and from the title of the story itself, I was kind of expecting kind of a rom-com kind of thing. And the first couple of chapters are Octavia sort of slowly coming to, having her suspicions and about whether or not Vinyl Scratch is a vampire, and she's starting to get a bit manic and just kind of panicking, and the audience is watching this, and it's a little funny. So that's kind of what I thought I was going into. I thought we were just going to get a rom-com, and then halfway through, when the thing takes a whole ass left turn, then I did feel a little, what's the word? Not betrayed, but just kind of, it's like, this isn't what I signed up for. So I think the story might benefit. I think I might, the issues that I have with the story might be ameliorated if the tags and the description and the title of the story had given me a better idea of what I was getting into.
Illya?
Well, it was confusing. I'm not certain even that the author knew where the story was going when he began to write it. And the reason I say that is that the dialogue's written, it's my favorite part of the story. I thought he did a really good job with the dialogue. And it was written whimsically at first. And so I was expecting something totally different than everyone. I never read the tags. I don't want them telling me what the story's about. I want to find out what the story's about. So when I began reading it, I thought it was going to be a total comedy, just about whether or not her roommate was a vampire, and all the Lucy show tricks and crazy stuff that you get into when you make assumptions like that. But then it turned into, it turns out she was a vampire, and it turned into a romance. And although the romance started out kind of weird and quite a bit too sudden for my tastes, it began to develop into one, and one, because of the great dialogue, I thought was going to be a fun romance to read. And then it just went crazy, as Pinkie Pie would say. I was lost in this thing that I suddenly couldn't even read. I was speed reading, just trying to get through it because it ran away from me, and I was disappointed by that because I was looking forward to a good romance. But yeah, such as it is.
Goombasa?
I went into it with the expectation of it being like Neighrator, a romantic comedy. I was expecting there to be, maybe some shenanigans. She doesn't want people finding out that she's a vampire, and we'll have some hilarious Weekend at Bernie's shenanigans where they try to get around her weird aversion to sunlight when she's got to go outside or something like that. But then it just seemed like, for the first few chapters, that's what it looked like it was trying to be. But then it kind of felt like it didn't know what it wanted to be anymore, and the whims of the author just seemed to change every few chapters. I mean, first it was a comedy, then it was a romantic comedy, then it was a dark comedy, and then it went full on underworld on us, and now it's an espionage thriller, and all of a sudden Vinyl Scratch is a friggin' terrorist, and I feel very uncomfortable right now.
Also Splinter Cell, yeah.
Yeah, Splinter Cell, too.
Bombs dropping out of the sky, Gatling guns. I mean,
dogs and cats living together, mass hysteria.
Okay. My first impression of this was based purely on stuff I'd heard about it in the past. I remember One Man's Pony Ramblings reviewing this back in the day, like not long after it came out. So I kind of knew about Octavia becoming a werewolf, and I knew that there was an inner circle and war and stuff, so I knew that already going in. It was one of those that it didn't spring immediately to mind when I first posted it in chat. It was more that when it popped up in the story, I went, oh god, I remember him talking about that. So it was like, I probably knew more about it than the rest of you did going in. That said, I still expected the romance to take center stage more than the rest of it, and I genuinely expected there to be more character development over 54,000 words.
Yeah.
And I mean,
amen.
There wasn't. I went into it expecting an Octoscratch romance where they each help each other deal with their supernatural natures. One has been there for a while, and one is newly given. And I'll be honest. One of the reasons I picked this for this podcast is I had not read this before I wrote Vampirelance, and I wanted to know how another quite famous Vinyl is a Vampire fic measured up. I wanted to know what other stuff was out there because I haven't read a lot of it. And I don't like tooting my own horn, but I think I like the way I did it better. I like character-driven stuff.
Your fic and this one are very different in scope.
Oh
I think
god,
we can
yeah.
agree.
Oh god, yeah.
You know what you're getting when you read Scribbler's fic, at the very least.
Well, you know what you're getting depending on which one of my fics you're reading. If you're reading April verse, then you have no fucking clue what you're getting.
I love Vampirelance. I really enjoyed it.
Right?
Yeah, can we talk about that fic instead?
No! No, you can't, because it's not... Well, it is finished, but the adaptation stalled, so no, you can't talk about that. I literally only brought it up because I had a vested interest in knowing how another fic that is quite famous handled vampires, and therefore I can't claim to be completely unbiased when I went into this, because I kind of knew what I wanted to see, and when it turned out to not be that, I was disappointed.
Well, and I think that's totally fair, and one thing that's really interesting is I think that's completely valid because you wanted to know how your story, well, I don't know if this was your main objective, but partially you might have wanted to know how your story was influenced by all the things that came before it, because...
Quite possibly.
I think this fic did influence a lot of fandom ideas, and some of the treatments of the whole Vinyl as a Vampire trope that came after. I don't know if this one originated the idea or not.
It's early enough that it could
It's
have.
early enough.
Yeah.
I think at this point, Vinyl had only had one appearance, and we still didn't know her eye color. Hence, they went with red, which died out pretty early on after the end of season 2, when there was that. I don't know if anybody else remembers. There was a big debate on that tiny bit where Vinyl lifts her glasses at Canterlot Wedding, and people are going, "Is it red? Is it Is it pink? Is it pink? Is it purple? What color are her eyes?" And there was a big debate because it was hard to see. So. Yeah, it wasn't until her later appearance where she showed her eye color and went, "Oh, it is pink." And all the Vinyl is a vampire with red eyes fix kind of died off.
I do remember that. And honestly, it kind of segues into kind of sort of a point I have is that I do have a theory as to how this fic came about and related to influences and all of that.
Let's hear it.
Illya, I'm absolutely in agreement with you. I don't think the author had any idea of where they were going when they wrote this story. I don't think anything was outlined. I don't think anything was planned. And I think the reason for that is, and this is entirely based on just how the story reads to me. I don't know the author. I haven't read if they've said anything about too clearly what they were trying to do. But this reads to me like someone in early fandom seeing, all the fun, crazy projects that people are doing with Octastract and whatnot, and they're just saying, that looks fun. I'm going to do something. And this person just sat down, had an idea, who knows exactly where it originated, and they started typing. And pretty much, they just went, oh, that's an idea. I'll do that. Oh, that's another idea. I'll do that next.
The Akira Toriyama approach.
Yeah.
Allow me to propose a theory on that.
Okay.
Would Thorny like to finish first? And then
I'll try to wrap it up pretty quick. And this is kind of the best method of early story drafting to some authorities. This is literally just by the seat of your pants, getting the ideas out and down on paper. This is like the best way to first draft a story for some people. And usually there'll be a next phase. And I think that's what a lot of us are really wanting, is for this person to have drafted it out, set it aside, come back and said, okay, I've got all these ideas. Now I need to make them work coherently together. But because this is fan fiction, and I think they were just having fun, they don't go through with that more professional side of the project. I think they just had fun with it. I think they finished and they said, there it is. And that's what I think this story is. I don't think it's trying to be anything more professional or profound. And as a result, I'm kind of fine with it. This is just fan fiction. This is just someone having fun. And I think that is kind of the point of doing all this stuff. I don't know that I feel comfortable demanding, well, now that you have done this, you must outline and have beta readers. And, obviously those would have improved the story, but I can't demand that, is, I think, where I'm at with this story.
Illya?
Well, I think probably the author was in college and he was practicing writing dialogue, which he was doing very well at. And he suddenly got called to do a very extensive project for his drama club. And so he left the story just on his computer. And his 14-year-old brother picked up the computer and began writing the rest of it. And then once the thing was, and so the brother then posted it. And then the real author came back and said, oh my God, what have you done? I'll write these 2 bonus chapters to try to cover this up. That's kind of the way it felt.
Can we make that canon?
Thing is, it's fandom. That's entirely possible, is the thing. There are lots of orphan stories that have been given to younger siblings.
The only reason I think that this is, that is a fun theory. I just don't know if I can prove it one way or the other.
One,
no, I know. Who knows? But the part of the reason that I think this is just someone having fun and not really trying to do anything incredible, I don't think they were trying to write a fandom classic, is because this story bounces off every single fandom idea at the time. And this is something I don't like about the story. I would advise anyone, whether you're doing it for fun, to not do this, is it references every single meme of Octoscratch from the era that I can think of. It references the epic love time animation. It is very heavily influenced by University Days to the point of outright lifting from it, especially in terms of Octavia.
Really?
Yes.
Could you explain that one in a bit more detail?
Yeah. So first quick note is this story was started. It started after University Days started. So University Days had already started circulating and gotten pretty big. And this one finished before University Days finished up, so it kind of exists inside University Days. And in University Days, anyone correct me if I'm misremembering, but in University Days, Octavia, has to have Vinyl as a roommate. She is terrified of her mother finding out her sexuality because her mother is a very prim, proper, conservative, you shall not be any kind of alternative identity under my watch. She's terrified of her mother taking her entire life away and basically imprisoning her. Her mother is an awful, despicable character. Those ideas especially, I think this story lifts directly from University Days, as well as just like Vinyl's personality and Octavia's personality in general.
And then Puppet, to her fame, stole it all over again.
I had completely forgotten that Octavia's mother was a character in this story until you brought it up.
She's a talking point in a minute.
Yeah, it doesn't last long. But yeah, I mean, the author does that thing where they include lines from the show verbatim, and they include lines from the epic Wub Time animation verbatim.
Which bits did they steal?
I can't remember. I'd have to look it up again, where the actual dialogue occurs. I think it was, at some point, Octavia uses that line, she's great, right? A roommate who does the dishes. She cleans them with wubs. I think it was that.
Oh, yeah, at the very beginning. I do remember.
Yeah, so it doesn't last long, and I'm okay with fanfics referencing the show or echoing a line or something, but for God's sakes, don't do it this much. This story's entire identity for like the first half is just bouncing off of other people's ideas of what Vinyl and Scratch are.
See, I thought the identity of this fic in the first few chapters was just that of a sugar-enhanced ADHD kid who hasn't taken their pills. It bounces all over the place and doesn't really have an identity of its own at the start. I didn't know it had lifted things directly from other stories, but it just felt so scattershot at the start. And you probably all remember that I posted in chat and went, I regret my choice, I hate this story.
Essence.
It does seem to bounce around quite a bit towards the beginning. Just the writing style is just very disjointed. There's just kind of the places where it's just like kind of a few paragraphs. It's separated by chapter breaks, and that'll make up the whole chapter.
Yeah, you smell that? You smell that? That's essence to fanfic.
And yet, by the end, none of those problems were in the latter chapters. And the writing style itself, we're going to get onto that in a second, the writing style, I reckon, had improved immensely by the end. And if this was written across an entire summer, there was a marked improvement between just the functionality of the opening chapters compared with the latter chapters. I'm not saying that the writing... I'm not saying the consistency of tone was good. I'm saying that just their ability to spell and construct a paragraph was getting better.
I think that's an important point, because the first part, which was somewhat of a romance, seemed to get better as it went along. And then he switched to action, and it was clumsy at first, and it seemed to get better as he went along. So as he wrote, he improved.
Neighrator, you have a rebuttal for this?
To be honest, we're jumping around a lot with the different points and stuff, but to be honest, the inconsistency of the writing style bothered me more than the writing style itself. A lot of that you might have just chalked up to style, or the fact that this was in large parts written in first person, like as if you're listening to Octi's train of thought, just kind of in real time. But the inconsistency of the writing style, particularly between the first part and the latter part, bothered me more.
The next point we were going to make was what are our expectations before reading the story, but Thorny's kind of already covered that. Thornquill, you did make another point of how quickly did the story seem to either counter or fail those expectations. Do you want to pick up on that?
Yeah, and I think we'll be able to bring the point to a close pretty quickly too. I think we're in general agreement that the story doesn't really give a good idea of what kind of story it is. And I think my theory is that it's because the author didn't know what kind of story it was going to be, because they didn't plan anything. And again, in this particular story's case, just written as a fun bit of fandom, that's fine. If I thought they were trying for more, that's when I would start to judge a bit more harshly and say, well, if you wanted to do these things, you should have done these other things. I will say, I think the story establishes the author's tone fairly early on, just in terms of the dialogue and the jokes they try to rely on. Tells you, okay, this is not going to be a serious story. But like the book cover, if it had one, is probably not how you want to sell people on this kind of story if you were to try to write it again. Like, just to give another example, yes, it's a comedy fic. That doesn't tell you everything about what kind of comedy it's trying to be. And this is kind of just a hard thing. I think what really should have happened was the description should have been written in a different way to give people a better idea of what to expect with this story. And if the person had planned out what they were doing, maybe they would have done so.
Goombasa?
I thought that it started out fairly well, like I said, and then about halfway through was when it really started to just completely fail any sort of expectations, because I felt like there was a point where it just stopped being a comedy for me. There were points where it just stopped being a romance for me. And it really sort of, it was really sort of off-putting for me. I do agree with Thorny. I don't think anything was planned out, and I do think that they were just doing this for fun. Even if you were just doing this for fun, it still makes it very difficult for me to read, because there's very little consistency to it.
Yeah, and I think, again, if this fic were to follow the whole revision process, you could keep most of the ideas in it and make it work. What's so jarring, I think, mechanically speaking, is that we get werewolves at secret societies and bomb battles and all of that, and absolutely none of it is foreshadowed. When we start reading this story, we have no inkling. Even though Octavia obviously doesn't, we have no inkling that we are in the sort of world where vampires and werewolves and silver-carrying ponies are at war on any level. It absolutely comes out of nowhere, because about halfway through the story, the author thought, I'm running out of ideas, what can I do? Oh, I know. I can have vampire killers attack. And so there we go off of that train ride. In revision, you would blend these things together a lot more.
Well, how quickly? That's a difficult question. Relatively early on, but then it continued to fail and fail and fail, because it started out as one thing, then it changed something else, then it changed something else, then it changed something else. So I was always falling down during the whole reading experience.
Neighrator? Neighrator?
NP, you there?
I'm so sorry.
No.
How the question is, how quickly did the story seem to either counter or fail those expectations? I'm so sorry. Give me just a sec here.
No, it's fine.
Sorry. Oh my gosh.
It's all right.
Doing
You
a
was being
thing.
my musical accompaniment. I
Oh
was doing
my
Muzak.
gosh. Sort of at the point where Octavia was hospitalized. So it turns out, Octavia finally works up the courage to confront Vinyl Scratch about all these signs that she's seeing. The fact that she's keeping blood under her bed, which, is Vinyl Scratch attempted to explain away, saying, "Oh, it's fake blood for a concert." I think that was the excuse, at least, and all these other reasons. Oh, and I'm not a vampire. I'm just an albino, and that's why I can't go outside, and I just don't like garlic, and that's why this. And it's not that I'm a vampire. I'm just an albino, and all these other completely plausible reasons. Octavia confronts her, and there's one thing she can't explain away, and then Vinyl Scratch suddenly literally turns into a monster, and she releases the darkness within, and she attacks Octavia and sucks her blood, and then ends up in the hospital. So right about there, I would say, is when I began to get the impression that that this is not exactly what I signed up for, and if it was not at that point, then it was definitely when Octavia turned into a lichen.
And on that note, as you've just pointed out, I should have given a proper summation of what this story's about. I'm
It's
not
good
good, but
times,
I'm modding myself rather than modding everybody else. Yeah, okay. Does anybody else want to have a go at summarizing this story? Like, what it's actually about?
You might be the best suited for. Okay, I'll give it a shot. But if
Okay.
I mess up at any point, just stop me.
It's fine.
the-
If you mess up, it will be totally in keeping with the story.
So just feel free to interject at any time if I get something wrong, because I've read this fic 6 weeks ago and I meant to have time to skim it again, but it just didn't work out. So the stage one, like, we're getting an introduction to the characters, and they're moving in together, and it's a fun kind of rom-com sort of feel at the beginning where they're getting used to each other's living habits, and it's kind of cute and fun. They're dropping hints that they like each other, but in typical rom-com fashion, both of them are like, or Octavia at least is completely oblivious. Stage two, like, Octavia starts to get a little manic as she's discovering more and more of these habits. She begins to have her suspicions about whether or not Vinyl Scratch is a vampire, and hence the title of the video of the story, at least I should say. Right, and this all comes to a head when Octavia confronts Vinyl Scratch, and then Vinyl Scratch promptly attacks her because, like, she releases the darkness within her, whatever the monster inside takes over, and she attacks Octavia and starts sucking her blood, and then Octavia says, "I love you," and that snaps Vinyl Scratch out of her thing, and then Vinyl passes out and wakes up in the the hospital.
Yeah.
I meant to say.
A restaurant if you are in the blood donation wing.
They wake up, and then it's this. Then there was this scene that I have a lot of problems with, and Octavia's in the hospital, and Vinyl Scratches in tears, like, "Oh no, I attacked you." And then Octavia slaps her 3 times, which I don't know how you slap people with hooves, because that's more like
You
punching.
It's
nearly
very
take
painful.
their fucking head off is what you
Yeah.
do.
I don't know if I think I have a problem with ponies slapping other ponies. Like, "Oh, you slapped me." It's not at all comedic at all. Like, that would hurt a lot.
But then again, we have got this theory of hooves. How do they work? And they seem to bend to pick things up.
I guess
Maybe they're kind of jelly-like.
I guess jelly hooves. Okay.
Yeah, like
Oh.
being slapped in the face with a
Ew.
bowl full of blancmange.
All right. So then, so now they're a vampire, but also I love you too. And it was more than friends, and this begins the romantic portion of the now they're kind of a proper couple at this point. Now that I
Proper.
volunteered. Now that I volunteered to take this over, does anybody feel like they can take it from here?
Thornquill, pick up the baton.
I can try. Okay. So if I'm getting the order of operations correct, I think this is where we have our obligatory meet the family scenes.
Aha.
It is
so
indeed. First Vinyl's, then Octavia's.
I thought it was Octavia's first, but it doesn't matter because they never show up again.
They do. They're there at the very end. And she does go and visit her mum in the hospital, and Vinyl's family are in the final battle.
True. The Vinyl's family matters more than Octavia's in every sense of the phrase. So we've got those scenes. Octavia's family is awful. Vinyl actually punches Octavia's mother so hard in the bathroom that she knocks her unconscious because she saw her
Not
like
on
as
purpose.
slightly vampiric. I forget. Yeah, but it
It
admittedly
was the red eyes and the teeth that showed up, I recall.
it was kind of a funny scene. I'm not gonna lie. If nothing else, the random extreme violence was kind of funny.
At that stage, yeah.
At that stage, exactly. I think we have shenanigans relating to the middle of the fic is definitely more muddled. We find out more about vampire society. Vinyl is like, a cleaner for the society that tries to help all paranormal creatures live their lives and keep them secret.
She's a wet work operator, as we find out, but yes.
Which is led by Princess Luna, who is also a vampire.
And they meet in Donut Joe's pony shop.
Donut
Pony
shop.
Joe's. Pony-
Just imagining a giant donut serving up ponies covered in sugar.
Well, they are vampires.
If I haven't mentioned that I'm sleep deprived already, what the hell did I just say? Donut Joe's pony shop.
Yep.
I love it.
This.
Oh my
I want fun
God.
out of this. It'd be like Homer Simpson with a giant donut head.
It's an alternate, like Simpsons, like Halloween reality, where
Yes.
all the ponies are donuts. They just have donut faces, and they serve ponies by the dozen.
And it's little ponies screaming in their donut boxes as they're taken away. Dirty bee. Nom, 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 nom.
I am so sorry. I've completely sidetracked us.
This is verging on Cygnus on a croissant levels of funny.
Oh my God.
What is it with us and pastries?
I don't know. That one just really tickled me.
Right,
but
Phony,
yeah, so-
carry on.
Don't-
I'm so
don't go,
sorry.
carry on.
It's good. So
the
at
inner
this point,
circle meeting up. That's where we got to.
Octavia sees Luna is a scary vampire pony, and even though she's already seen a scary vampire pony, she's so terrified she runs into the Everfree Forest. She goes into a cave, and she gets attacked by a werewolf. And so, of course, she becomes a werewolf.
Who is never seen again.
They said like it was too far gone. It's lost all of its intelligence and all that. You know, it was a feral
Gone
werewolf.
feral, yeah.
And then
That part was so
Um,
rushed.
we have our villain enter, who hates all paranormal creatures because, of course, paranormal creatures killed her family. I'm pretty sure that was the reason. It's stock, so we'll go with it. You know, there's back and forth. The paranormal hunter threatens Octavia, and Vinyl threatens to expose them. And Octavia, of all things, is still worried about her mother finding out things, which, no. And things escalate. Equestria Daily gets bombed. Yes.
Not the website.
Not the website, but that was
Well,
another
the
thing.
website did exist at
Oh, yeah.
that point.
No.
So, but then again, Equestria Daily, was that actually a pun from something in the show from Gabby Gums? Is it an actual newspaper in the show?
I do not know.
No, it is not.
See, that would have been okay.
Equestria Daily, I think, has always been its own thing. And it was a thing for a while for fanfics to reference Equestria Daily in one way or another, the website, as if it existed in Ponyland. That was a thing a lot of people did.
And Sophisto. I remember distinctly reading an entire fic once where Trixie kept trying to convince Sophisto to have sex with her, and he was busy going, "Stop it, I'm updating Equestria Daily." And this went on for like 4,000 words.
Oh, Christ, that's creepy.
Oh, yes.
Uh-huh.
I'm more
Okay.
impressed that they managed to wring 4,000 words out of it, honestly.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to say the less said about that shit, the better.
But just shows you how much worse this fic could have been for all its faults.
I suppose. And then Vinyl gets kidnapped because she tries to go after the villain herself. Octavia goes to save Vinyl. There's a big showdown between silver bullet gun-toting vampire hunters and vampires and werewolves. I think the villain survives and just gets imprisoned.
She does. There's
Okay.
that whole exchange at the end of the villain and Vinyl. I'll pick up this last little bit. Are evil, bad exes. Silver Streak is the head villain. She runs her own little organization, which is all based around silver, and all the people in it are called Silver Stone or Silver something or other. They definitely have their theme and run with it. They use silver bullets. They use silver swords and silver knives. They name themselves after silver things. They have silver codes to get around places.
They
And
have
the
a
very
fixation.
Yeah. And at the very end, Silverstreak has planned to grind up a whole bunch of silver she bought in jewelry, put it into the Canterlot water supply, and kill any supernatural who drinks the water. And Octavia finds this because Vinyl goes rogue. She desperately wants to get back at Silverstreak, and Octavia doesn't know why she has this absolute antipathy for her. I mean, you think at this point, she wants to wipe out my entire race would be enough of a reason, but it's hinted that Silverstreak did something terrible to Vinyl. At which point I'm thinking, oh god, did she, torture her best friend? Did she, kill her lover? Did she spike her puppy? What did she do? Turns out they dated. Woo! And Silverstreak was dating Vinyl to try and get to the inner circle. Vinyl found out and felt very betrayed. Because she'd very nearly given up the secrets of Luna's little organization. At the very end, Octavia looks at Silverstreak's bank statements, because it's great to try and run a secret organization that is trying to overthrow part of the Equestrian government, one of the Diarchs, but charge everything to your regular bank account with your actual name on it.
Wah, wah.
Yeah, not exactly a criminal mastermind here. But anyway, she very nearly succeeds. Vinyl, having gone rogue, has been captured by this Silver Circle place, and Octavia goes to the dam, the reservoir or whatever it's called, the water cleaning plant, that's it. And she calls Luna on a cell phone and says, "I know where Vinyl is." And Luna tells her to stay back, and she goes, "No, she's in danger, I need to go to her." And she runs and gets knocked out and tied to a chair. When she wakes up, Vinyl's clearly been tortured. Silverstreak has set up a camcorder, and she wants Vinyl to admit to the world that vampires exist. Which, considering at this point she's going to kill them all, seems a bit counterproductive. But anyway, Octavia realizes that Silverstreak is effectively just a gigantic bitter ex and wants to hurt Vinyl in any way possible, which kind of involves Octavia getting her chest carved open and shouting, "Cut me more, I like it," which was a very bizarre scene. Yeah. And then all of the Inner Circle turn up to save them. Silverstreak is pinned down by Vinyl, and there's an exchange at the end. Vinyl says, "I hate it when you get to the end of a book and the hero has killed their way through all of the rest of the minions, and then when they get to the final boss, they go, 'No, I don't want to kill you because I'll be just like you,' and then proceeds to do exactly that." So it's not quite lampshaded because she fucking does it. And Silverstreak does survive and goes to prison at the end. And then Octavia and Vinyl go to the Grand Galloping Gala and dance a smooch in front of her parents, who flounce away in disgust.
And then we have the Monty Python cutaway where it says "so much for pathos," because no character has any pathos in this entire story.
Yeah, and we have two bonus bits at the end, one of which is a kind of prequel about why Vinyl Scratch has got blue mane and sunglasses, which I didn't think needed to be there, but it was a cute little fic that could have existed independent of this story.
I guess.
Yeah, it was cute enough.
It was cute.
I don't think it did anything wrong.
No, it didn't do anything wrong. I was just curious about its placement. It could have been just a small, self-contained ficlet. Yeah, you can read this in context of My Roommate is a Vampire, or it exists quite well on its own, because it does. It does exist quite well on its own.
Author likes to ramble.
I would argue it would have been its own little story as opposed to tacked on at the end there.
Yeah, and then we have
piece or whatever.
Then we have the second epilogue. And Illya, what's the second epilogue about?
The second epilogue is just the guy poking his finger at us and saying, "Hey, I knew I was doing all this, and I just didn't care." That's what it. I mean, I didn't. That's not very accurate, but it's the way I received it. I just felt like he was sort of excusing himself for all of the shark jumping by saying, "I really planned to do that. I got you, didn't I?" That's the way I read it.
You felt cheated at the end, or do you feel mocked?
Mocked, trolled. I feel it was a troll fic for that. But here's the thing. I don't think it was intended to be. I think the author got lost in his own stuff and was trying to justify it in the end by saying, "I was just trolling you."
We could. I'm just saying we could read that entire chapter by itself right now if we wanted to. And I'll volunteer if you think that would be. All right, here we go.
Pretty good summation of the story,
long is
to be
it?
honest. It's like 400 words. It's like 2 minutes.
Okay.
Once upon a the chapter title is called "Bonus: Jumping the Goddamn Shark." Meta. Once upon a time, there was an Earth pony who played a cello, which is totally lame in every aspect. Not to mention that Earth ponies pretty much suck. Anyway, this Earth pony was named Octavia, who was seen like for maybe 5 seconds of screen time for her cameo. Then people got the idea that, hey, wait a minute, she's a musician. That wicked cool DJ Pone 3 is a musician, and therefore they should be lesbian. So one day Octavia was like, my life sucks and my parents don't love me, so I'm just going to move in with this DJ because I'm poor and my special talent sucks. And so it was that she moved in with this DJ because she was poor and no pony liked her and she sucked. But then all of a sudden, out of nowhere, somewhere in between the lines at the bottom of the page, in the fine print written in invisible ink, Octavia started liking Vital because Vital Scratch was cool and wore awesome purple sunglasses and had a sexy mane that was spiky and blue. But since there would be no plot if Octavia suddenly just, I don't know, confessed her love to the mayor, because obviously Vinyl Scratch is about as subtle as a goddamn hippo painted in neon colors with Princess Celestia riding on its back wielding a sword when it came to Octavia, because Vinyl Scratch also loved Octavia. But then there was more problems, because if there wasn't, there'd be no story. So buck you, Vinyl Scratch is now a vampire, because logic dictates that vampires make everything cool and it attracts a good audience of Twilight fans and prepubescent girls. Octavia suspects something because she has no life and starts thinking, maybe Vinyl Scratch is a vampire. Dun, dun, dun. Spoken in context, although dun, dun, dun is actually written in. That's not me. So then after a whole bunch of plot, Octavia comes to the conclusion that Vinyl Scratch is a vampire because if the author tried to stretch it out any longer, it would become boring because we all know everyone is there to read the good stuff. Vampire pony sex. So then Vinyl Scratch bit Octavia on accident, and she was very, very sorry. Oh, Octavia, I am so sorry, I just bit you. Octavia was still bleeding, but that was okay because she was losing lots of blood and it was getting all over the bed, and she said, "It's okay, Vinyl, I still love you. I love you too. Okay, let's be lesbians, okay?" But then there was another problem because parents don't like Octavia being gay because lesbians, and because parents, Vinyl now has excuse to punch the living shit out of Octavia's mom because she is badass. In any case, the story should have ended by now because all problems are solved and we know that Vinyl Scratch is a vampire, except the author wanted base explosions and action and hoof fights, so he made Octavia werewolf shit. No, not a werewolf. I mean, werewolf. Wait, no, liking now. Octavia is a whiny emo bitch. Oh no, now the story sucks. The shark has been jumped because there are wolves. Bitch, you want to see a jumping shark? I'll jump the goddamn jaws with a jump rope while singing Winter Wrap Up on a motorcycle riding down the ramp from the top of the moon. I'm liking this idea. Liking pun. The author is on cruise control and can't stop. Okay, keyboard fixed. Anyways, because base explosions, we move on and skip past everything, which happens to include breaking into a bank, blowing more things up, gunfights, slow motion club music, and drugs. In the end, every pony is happy, and the sun is singing, and the birds are shining, and the flowers are burning, and everything is okay now because Octavia and Vinyl can love each other and make out sloppily with lots of tongue action. And then everybody is satisfied because they finally got their vampire pony sex, except with the lichen thrown into the mix. Oh God, how does it even work? Watch out for the teeth. And that's how things would have gone if this were a vampire romance. Happy?
The end. And then they had Abigail everyday sex.
Okay. So, first of all, that was beautiful, and I think that should be excerpted and uploaded to your channel, NP.
Yes! Yeah.
And okay, so the only thing I'll add in is that I interpreted this differently from Illya, and honestly, I can see how it felt the way it did to Illya. And this is just how text doesn't always carry its meaning perfectly, so one of us is probably wrong. It could very well be me. When I read this, I got the sense that the author was poking fun at themselves, not us. You know, they spent months writing this fic. They went with some dumb ideas because it was fun to them, and they got feedback in the comments, and they said, okay, yeah, this is pretty ridiculous and even kind of stupid at some point. But they were happy with it as is, and were like, I'm not going to go delete the whole thing, re-upload it and whatnot. I'm just going to say, the story fits into all these hilarious, stupid tropes. It's one of these stories, poking fun at themselves in a way, not at us. I agree with Thorny. I thought it was fun. It was fine. Like, yeah, the story kind of got away from them. By the end, they're like, yeah, this one kind of got away from me, and that's okay. So I didn't feel mocked or made fun of or tricked at all. I thought it was, I was kind of right there with the author.
I got a feeling, an Aprilverse feeling from that. I got the feeling it was like when we mock ourselves in Aprilverse, and it's all meant in fun. We're not like poking fun at people, because I really hope that people don't watch or listen to Aprilverse and think that we are mocking our audience just because we're making jokes.
Well, I don't actually think that he was trying to make anyone upset or mad or anything. I just sort of feel like he was trying to cover up for what he had done by pointing at us. It's a really complicated thing. It's sort of what Thornquill said, only what's the motive? Hiding or making fun of himself or covering up what he realizes he's done.
So you think it was more like a Tommy Wiseau situation?
I probably would if I knew who Tommy Wiseau was.
Tommy Wiseau was the guy who made The Room, and originally he tried to sell it as a serious drama. But after he realized that people were just coming to laugh at the film, he immediately turned around and said, "No, I always meant it to be a comedy. It's supposed to be a black comedy." You're supposed to find it hilarious for how inept it is. And he's stuck to that gun ever since, even though everybody who has worked with the guy says that he was full of shit on that. He was trying to make a serious drama, but he didn't know how to make a movie.
That is precisely the way I feel about it.
The thing is, the last chapter to me doesn't feel like covering up. I don't get that sense of defensiveness from it. I get that sense of, okay, you guys are right. Some of this stuff was really ridiculous, and I'm happy with that, is the sense that I get from that.
Then he's very clever.
I mean, if you're saying that he fooled me, then, I can acknowledge that bit of idiocy. I am a bit naive sometimes, and I'm fine with that. The only thing is, it's not the typical response. If this guy had been trying to write a fandom classic and was taking himself 100% seriously, one, there are some lines in this fanfic that absolutely do not line up with that, specifically about lesbian vampires. Not even in that parody chapter at the end, but in actual dialogue that are brilliant.
Psychotic Hang on. I clipped this out because I loved this line. Hang on, I'm going to find it. It's when Vinyl and Octavia are interrogating a member of Silver Streaks in her terrorist organization.
The best scene in the whole story. Like, if you read nothing else, you could probably read this scene and it would be awesome.
Yeah,
okay, so everyone agrees this one's terrific.
Yeah, this scene was it was absolutely taking the piss and not making me taken seriously, and I wish the story had leaned into this more. Because you got Vinyl and Octavia talking to each other, and Octavia suggests, so we've got to do it like good cop, bad cop, to which Vinyl replies, first off, that never works. It's got to be bad cop, except instead of cops, we're emotionally unstable, psychopathic, lesbian, supernatural demons with homicidal tendencies and a penchant for cold-blooded torture. Vinyl laughed evilly. Vinyl, that sounds absolutely horrendous. I know, it's going to be so awesome. You scare me. And
that sounds good. Yeah, that is very good, actually.
Yes, but that's very consistent with this guy can really write dialogue. I mean, we'll get to that in a little bit, but that's not saying that there's anything redeeming about the story there, but there's a whole lot that's redeeming about the way he writes dialogue. It's fantastic.
Nah, the point that I was only trying to make was that with dialogue like that, I don't get the sense that this is someone that is taking themselves 100% seriously, and when they get called out on it, are desperately trying to save face and their self-image. I don't get that level of defensiveness. Like, typically what people would do, and obviously Tommy Wiseau doesn't do this, but they'll just get really angry and defensive in the comments. You don't understand how brilliant my writing is, and blah, 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 blah. We've all seen that. But even just I don't get the sense that this author is trying to cover up or save face. I get the sense that they are embracing ridiculousness and just having fun with it.
Well, I'm going to bow to you and say that I probably changed my mind on the troll idea. Yeah, you're probably right.
I may not be. They could be a troll. I just personally didn't get that sense, so it could be either.
54,000 words and several months of work would be a hell of a lot of effort for a troll gag at the end. If that was the point of it, was to be an entire troll fic. I don't know about them. If that's their level of commitment, then maybe they deserve their Troll King crown, because I could not commit that much time, effort, and blood, sweat, and tears into trolling people.
I mean, we can never underestimate the power of people with too much free time, but like I said, I just didn't get that sense in this particular case.
Which does segue us into our next point, which I will point out, we've been recording for just over an hour, and out of 12 points, we've just finished point 3.
But we've actually covered several already, just out of order.
Yeah. We've touched upon others, but we kind of reined ourselves back in because they were separate points. So, characterization. Extra attention paid to narrative voice. Does this first-person narrator sound like Octavia? This is an early fandom work, so how much stock should we as readers put into accepted characterization of background ponies the fandom has, inverted commas, adopted? So Octavia, as a character, doesn't really have a character, and certainly she didn't at this point in the show. She got some from episode 100, but it was very much left up to cliches and things that the fandom had invented and then just gone, oh, we like that idea, and they just perpetuated it until it became accepted characterization. Largely influenced, in Octavia's case, by epic wub time. So, does this narrative voice work for her? What do you think? Goombasa, you're tapping. What do you think?
I actually do think that it works well. That is one of the strengths that I will give this story is I think for a first-person narrative, it is relatively well done in how it keeps to Octavia's thoughts. I do think that the characterization is shaky at times, but that mostly comes with the fact that the story changes so much as it goes on. But in the beginning, while I do find it kind of weird that she jumps straight to the conclusion of Vinyl being a vampire rather than trying to think of something a bit more logical, I do think that her character in this story, at least early on, is relatively well done.
Neighrator?
Vinyl seems a bit more, Octavia in particular seems a bit more manic. She seems a lot, I think the typical fandom interpretation of her is just a lot more sort of calm and put together. And yeah, so in this fic, I thought she was just a lot more high strung than I've come to expect from her. Kind of in line with what we've seen in episode 100. After all, I mean, they do like jump at each other with her bow, like in midair, like Shinobi kind of fight, but then they say, "Oh nope, that's too far. Let's take it down a step." So it's okay, I guess.
Illya?
Yeah, Octavia in this story is kind of like the little Catholic schoolgirl, all repressed and quiet on the outside, but seething and hot on the inside. I rather liked her characterization. I was very happy with it.
Thornquill?
I think I'm with everyone, although admittedly I had never imagined Illya describing Octavia in that way. But all right.
She's not the only one with hidden depths.
The only thing I'll counter on is that the question of whether or not Octavia had a fandom personality at this point. I'm still going with the idea that this is university days Octavia planted into a situation where her roommate is a vampire, and that's the only real difference. Because honestly, there had been a lot of influence on what people's idea of what Octavia should sound and act like by this point. You already mentioned Epic Wub Time. That one cemented a lot of ideas of what these two were like. But we'd had University Days was going on. We'd had Allegrezza as well. I don't know if that was hugely influential, if they're very similar. But
Allegrezza and University Days are like the big Octoscratch stories of early fandom.
Yeah, so I think this version of Octavia is pretty true to those ideas, and honestly, if there is a criticism, it's that this story doesn't do anything unique with her character, is how I would put it.
My major thing with Octavia is she seems quite hollow to me as a character. She seems more of a vehicle for the author to say witty lines than a character in her own right. And that became pretty apparent to me when she immediately turned from meek and mild little sheltered posh pony to ultimate badass tearing up the room, and with no real transition other than, "Ooh, I got a bit of a boo-boo as a bite, and suddenly I am epic badass," with no transition of her settling into her new Lycan powers. She just
training montage or
nothing, and not even any kind of, like, obviously she's got the Lycan voice in her head every so often. She turns up in puppy format in Dreamscape at some point, but there's no real transition for. I don't know about you, but the first time I had to do a dissection in my biology lessons at school, I had to psych myself up to having to tear up and open up kidneys and things. And the first time I had to dissect a frog was not a happy time. Octavia doesn't even practice like dead stuff. She's like, she doesn't remember the rabbit and it turns her stomach, and then suddenly she's actively fighting other ponies. And she's not frightened of their guns. She's shouting, cut me, do it again," when somebody's knifing her in the chest. It just seemed a little hollow to me. And it did seem like she was whatever the author needed her to be at the time. And whether that was a reflection of the tonal shift of the story or just inconsistency of her characterization, I'm not sure. But it made her feel like she didn't develop as a character so much as she just was a chameleon. I heard somebody tut then. Who was that?
Oh, that was me. I don't disagree, actually. I agree with you on all those points.
Okay, I was being tutted out like, how dare you think that?
Sorry.
Don't apologize. What about Vinyl's characterization? Who wants to talk about Vinyl?
She's a terrorist.
She really is! She doesn't even dress it up. She's an actual terrorist who bombs places.
I have such a big problem with that. And again, I mostly attribute it to the massive tonal shift of the story, which we'll get into at a slightly later point. But at the beginning, I can kind of see where they were going. She's more loose. She's more laid back. And for a little while, I was willing to accept that, yes, this is Vinyl. But then we get to the point where she is actively threatening ponies, where she's a cleaner or a fixer or whatever the hell you want to. She's a hit pony, basically, is how she kind of describes herself. And
although although Octavia does make a big point of saying, Vinyl, you've never killed anyone. To which I can look and went, she's really old and she's used a lot of bombs. Are we sure she's never killed anyone?
Exactly. It just, that point more than anything else derails Vinyl's character very heavily, at least in my eyes. Like, I'm willing to accept a tonal shift. I think it's very off-putting, but when you shift the characters that drastically, that is the point where I found myself really checking out of this story and actively sort of hating this portrayal of Vinyl, honestly, for those actions alone, because it felt so detached from what she was early in the story.
So I'd like to get a bit more into the details for my own benefit, because like NP, I read this a little longer ago and my memory might be a bit more fuzzy. But the way I recall it, and taking in mind that this story does switch into like a Tom Clancy thriller mode about halfway through, when Vinyl does use violence, she is acting against the members of the Silver Circle or whatnot, whatever they're called, who have actively threatened to kill, her, Octavia, and eventually everyone else if they can manage it. So she's acting against them in response to their violence. When she bombs the newspaper offices, I remember the author making a very specific point that no one was there, and Vinyl made certain of that. She only did so to destroy the evidence that the Silver Circle had sent them to expose the paranormal community to equestrian society and triggering an all-out war. So she destroyed the newspaper building to try to protect, Octavia mainly. And it's an extreme case of violence played for comedy. And yeah, that can be seen as very problematic, depending on the light you cast it in. But I don't remember there being anyone who's just killed because Vinyl's an edgelord. But feel free to correct me if I'm wrong on that.
No, there wasn't anyone who was ever killed because she was an edgelord. There were instances later on where she had beaten ponies up nearly to the point of death when they were trying to take her in for Silver Streak to torture. But as I recall, nobody actually dies in this story except in backstories. And we'll get into that when we want to talk about Silver Streak, because I genuinely want to talk about Silver Streak when we're done talking about Vinyl. Illya, what do you think of Vinyl?
I hated her.
Succinct. Why did you hate her?
Well, I just thought she was an ass. I mean, she started out being a little too. Well, she started out just lying, and then she attacked Octavia, and then it turns out she's done all sorts of horrible things, and she's just a bitch. I mean, I just didn't like her, and that may be strong and good writing on the author's part to make me dislike her. If so, he succeeded. I didn't like Vinyl.
Except I think she was the romantic hero. We were supposed to like her. We were supposed to be championing her and Octavia.
Well, there are other reasons. There are other reasons why that we'll get into with your Silver Shoes or whatever her name is.
Silver Streak.
Yeah, there are other reasons why I dislike Vinyl.
Okay, then. So Silver Streak, her backstory is in twofold, really. That she used Vinyl. They were dating for quite some time. Vinyl fell pretty hard for her, and then discovered that she was being used to get at the inner circle so Silver Streak could kill Princess Luna and the others. and Vinyl felt very, very betrayed by this. Silver Streak hates all vampires and werewolves and the minor fairy population at the back of the room because when she was a kid, a lichen killed her parents. I've got to say, as far as her motivation goes, I absolutely do not agree with her actions, but I understand them, and I don't think that's a good thing in this instance. In a comedy fic, you should not have a full-out proper tragic villain. What are everybody else's thoughts on this? Illya?
Well, this is my problem, and it's a problem with the whole story, and we'll get into it some with the characterization of the princesses. I feel like the silver shoes or the silver circle or whatever it was were the good guys in the story, and that the vampires and lichens led by Princess Luna were the bad guys. And I just couldn't get over that. I didn't feel like these people should have been protected and hidden, and it's sort of like one of these mafia movies where the heroes of the story are the mafia, the villains and the criminals. I don't like stories like that. If you're not a real good guy, then you're not my guy. And Silver Streak was trying to make right what a terrible wrong that had been occurring in Equestria, and I feel like everybody else was working against her. I couldn't get on board with that.
Thorny?
So I'm going to counter challenge a little bit. This kind of brings us back to the ideas of genre, in that paranormal fiction today is very much a genre where you ask the question, does someone deserve to die or have their life taken away from them if they are biologically more... This gets more awkward when I try to phrase it out mechanically. But basically, vampire is a predator of humankind. But if a vampire still has intelligence and tries to choose not to be malevolent towards humankind, does it still deserve to die because it has the potential or something? That's kind of what paranormal fiction tries to play with.
It's kind of like past sins.
Yeah.
How many bad things do you have to do to be a bad pony? And at what point are you past the point of forgiveness?
And in Octavia's case in this particular story, Octavia has done nothing but accidentally become a lichen. And from Silver Streak's perspective, that is enough. Like, you should at that point have the rest of your life taken away for the benefit of society, is kind of her standpoint. And I actually kind of wanted to circle this back to the story that we reviewed, I can't remember, with Celestia and the Changelings, where it was the one you picked, Illya.
Relinquish the Sun.
Yes, Relinquish the Sun, where the Changeling Queen asks Celestia, my race is, kind of a predator race, but do we deserve to die because of what we are? And Celestia says, perhaps. And we didn't jive with Celestia's mindset at that point. But in this case, I think Celestia is very parallel with Silver Streak, and the Changeling's very parallel with Vinyl and Octavia in this very particular example. And I was curious on your thoughts on that, Illya.
I totally disagree. I don't think the point of this story was to round up all the lichens and the vampires and kill them all. I think the point was, let's let Equestria know these things exist so their children don't get eaten while nobody's looking. And that was what Silver, whatever her name was, Silver Shoes, I forget that dang pony, Silver something. That was what she was trying to do. She was trying to expose them. She was trying to go to newspapers and produce articles and show that these things were happening. And that's what she was being prevented from doing, not rounding them all up and killing them. And the princesses were complicit in this whole thing. It's a travesty, and I'm on the side of the silver folks. Let the knowledge be known.
I would agree with that up to a point, because she did then try to commit mass genocide with the silver in the water.
Which could have potentially hurt regular ponies as well, which I do think was pointed out near the ending of the fic that much silver in the water probably would not have been good for ordinary folks either.
But she didn't start out doing that. I mean, she was brought to that point by, hey, there's nothing we can do here.
They did blow up a building, so yeah, that's, I mean...
If I'm remembering the dialogue correctly, Silver Streak's kind of master plan was to expose the paranormal community so that Equestria would rise up and expunge all of these creatures living among them with violence. And if not that, then basically she was doing everything she was doing to hurt Vinyl. So what she wanted to do was kill everything. But before she did that, she wanted to be justified. She wanted to see ponies to see her point of view, and that was partly why she wanted to expose them. She didn't really want to expose them to protect anyone. She was always in it for the genocide, but that's how I read it.
Revenge. I always read it as she wanted revenge, and it was revenge born out of grief, that she had put this veneer of I want to protect everyone over it to justify it to herself why she wanted to slaughter an entire race, because they'd hurt her so badly personally. And I always thought that it's a kind of story that you see in a lot of fiction and a lot of people, that if someone gets hurt so badly by one person, they turn against that entire group. And it is irrational, but they justify it and make it, they absolve themselves and say, well, clearly what I'm doing is for the greater good, conveniently ignoring that it's not.
Well, I'll accept that premise. Silver Streak herself may have been, nutcase that should be stopped, but the organization, I think, had a good cause.
And that's one of the major problems I had with this, was that I liked Silver Streak as a character and found her more interesting than the main cast.
She deserved a better story, I feel.
She did.
Yes, she would have been much better off if there was a story that introduced her sooner, because she really only showed up like past the halfway point in this story, when everything went Underworld Splinter Cell. And
Underworld Splinter Cell.
Yeah, yes, that's basic. Vampire the Masquerade. Let's go with that.
Splinter
World.
But yeah, she would have been better serviced, I feel, in a story that was more cohesive in tone.
I find that very interesting, as I found Silver Streak absolutely stock, completely unoriginal, and forgettable to the point where me and Illya can't remember her name unless I'm staring at the gosh darn doc right in front of my eyes. So that's kind of interesting. I'll just put that down to differences in what we identify with.
I had to look up Hoity Toity's name because I couldn't remember him, and he's from the fucking show. Like, literally, I was looking at the doc and going, oh, god damn it. And I couldn't remember what episode he was from, so I typed into Google, rarity, fashion, stallion, sunglasses, and looked for that, because I couldn't remember who the fuck he was.
I will actually agree that she is stock, but I thought that she was a stock that was done well. Like, the tropes and cliches become tropes and cliches for a reason, because they're well worn and they work. And even if you just use the basic building blocks, if you use those building blocks well, you're still going to get a fairly solid wall. That one patch being Silver Streak, while the rest of the wall is crumbling around it, notwithstanding. But I do think that she was stock, yes, but I do think that she was written well enough that I would have liked to see her in a better story.
I'll give you this, and this pertaining to characterization as a whole for the three characters we've talked about so far. Silver Streak actually does want something and works to get it, which is something that we kind of identified Vinyl and Octavia don't really have. Vinyl and Octavia just kind of say Vinyl and Octavia things and they're shipped together. But Octavia especially, like, we never really get a clear sense of what she wants other than maybe play cello somewhere prestigious.
And finally be able to tell her mum to fuck off.
Silver Streak is a stronger character in that point, in that she actually has a desire, a real concrete desire.
She has agency. Neither of the other two have agency.
That's what I was looking for. Thank you.
the characters I found most entertaining in this whole thing were Luna and Silverstreak. And just thinking about it now, that might be because there's two of the only characters who can make decisions and go with them, and they make stuff happen. Whereas Vinyl and Octavia seem very reactive to situations rather than active protagonists. And it's difficult to root for reactive characters who never make the transition to active. Even when Vinyl goes rogue, it's all off screen. I don't know. I liked Silverstreak. I kind of wanted her to win.
And I think now that we've identified that she's the one with agency, that's very understandable.
Yeah.
Well, at the very least, it would have meant that Vinyl Octavia had something to do other than just wander about going, oh, I'm a lesbian lichen. Oh, I'm an ageless vampire. Oh, should we go and kill shit? Yeah, sure. Should we go and joke about banana splits in a really inappropriate way on the street? Yeah.
Please fucking no.
I hated that thing. Okay,
I
I'm gonna
hated that
have
part.
a tiny little insert here. There is a certain... It's not even a scene, it's like a couple of paragraphs. And I posted this in chat and just went, what the fuck is this story? Because at that point, I still didn't like it. I grew to like the story as the Splinter Cell stuff came in. But at this point, it was still just random slice of life shippy stuff with a couple of hollow caricatures. And there's this one exchange. Oh, God, hang on. I'm going to find it on my phone because I screenshotted this.
Do it.
Busy doing nothing, looking the whole way through. There we go. Wait, no, that's an endgame spoiler. No, I won't read that out. I just realised that's the one I sent you about the rat.
Oh, I love the rat.
Exactly. I'm looking at that going, oh shit, better not read that out. Please don't tell me I deleted this. Fuck, I did. Anyway, do you want to find it? I don't know what chapter it's from.
It's worth finding. One sec. It was in the chat. Give me a second.
Okay. Busily doing nothing, looking the whole way through. I need to find lots of things not to do.
Do 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 do.
Just cut this part out. It's worth finding.
Yes, I'm leaving this in. This is our little musical accompaniment. I feel like with that scene in the Bay Explosion Ninja Turtles movie where they're in the lift and they just randomly start tapping and making music before they have the fight scene.
Oh, you mean the one narratively good part of that entire movie?
It's the reason that's the only bit I remember.
Like, while MP's looking for that, the reason why I enjoyed that scene is because they're going on that lift to fight Shredder, and from a narrative standpoint in that movie, they are petrified of Shredder. For all they know, they're going up there to die. And so just the scene of them goofing off in that lift as they're going to fight their mortal enemy that could potentially kill any one of them very easily, I thought was actually pretty brilliant on the writer's side of things. And it was the only part of that movie I actually enjoyed.
Got it.
So that was well timed then.
Shall I read this out?
Go on, read it out.
Did you see how big it was? Vinyl gushed. It was huge, I giggled. So long and thick and creamy. I shuddered. It got all over my face. Oh, I know. I had to lick it off of you. It was so sticky, too. I can't believe you swallowed that entire thing down your throat. I didn't think I could take it all in. Passing ponies walking on the sidewalk stared at us, their minds working to put two and two together. Mothers covered their foals' virgin ears. Vinyl cheered. That was the best banana split I've ever had. Where the hell do they find bananas that huge anyway?
Wonk, 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 wonk.
We'll frame that and put it on the wall.
That was completely unnecessary. Why we've had dick jokes before. Why do that? Why do that?
And the thing is, the reason I didn't like it was it had nothing to do with anything else. If that was something like Aprilverse, which is built on random non-sequitorial shit, I would understand that. But this story had a plot. Like, it wasn't always a good one, but it had a plot, and then we suddenly took time out to have a random out of character dick joke.
It's not clever either. Like all of us knew within a sentence what was happening. It's just why do that?
I think that some of it was, I said this in chat, that I reckon a lot of the humor from this was throw everything at the wall to see what sticks, and then keep the stuff that didn't stick. And then keep the stuff that did, anyway. And then keep the stuff that did stick, and then keep the stuff you hadn't even thrown.
That's actually fairly accurate, I think.
Yeah, so this had some brilliantly written dialogue, like the psychotic lesbian scene, which sounds so weird out of context. And yet it also had the banana dick joke. You're like, yeah, this is really well written. Oh, wait, no, it's not. Oh, yeah, it's really good. Oh, shit. This is a really good Silver Street character. Oh, God, Octavia, what are you doing? It's like, this was the fucking bipolar fic.
Not to mention they're lesbians. That was what got me. I was like, wait a minute, you're bi now?
I love the fact that at the very end they still start saying Philly Foolers and went, no, actually we know in this story that unlike a lot of pony fic, especially from this time, Philly Fooler is not the accepted term. They have actively called themselves lesbians more than they've said Philly Foolers. Why are we suddenly reverting to type?
There.
I think that was more to do with the time period in which it was written than any ulterior motive on that one.
Where exactly did Philly Fooler come from exactly?
It's when we wanted ponification of a lot of terms. And people at the very start of fandom, there were lots and lots of things in the show that just had horse puns. So they decided that they wanted to make their own horse puns, which is why we got things like wing boners and Philly Fooler and colt cuddler. And although it became a thing in real life afterwards, breeder. Yeah, early fandom was an interesting place. A lot of it's fallen by the wayside, and like it's odd sometimes to go back and read early fandom works because the stuff that stuck around and the stuff that very much fell out of fashion may not always be stuff you predicted would. Like the term Philly Fooler, I haven't seen that used in a fic that's been written recently in years, but early fandom was full of it. So I don't know. Maybe I'm just not reading the right stories anymore.
Well, it could be partially a reflection of current events. I mean,
True.
It's much, much more in the news now than it was 10 years ago.
Also, when fandom started and when this fic was written, gay marriage was still outlawed in America.
That's right.
I genuinely have to remind myself of that sometimes. Like, I keep forgetting that pony is older than gay marriage.
In some countries.
Wow.
In the US specifically is what I was thinking of. Like, 2000, it was, gosh, when was? I have to look it up, but...
Well, state by state. I think civil unions were still a thing anyway, and then...
No, I was just genuinely wondering, like, when it happened in the UK. No, it happened before America. I've made myself curious now.
Which is interesting, because we never had a time here when you could be thrown in jail for being gay.
Yeah, UK did that. Sadly, that's why the phrase is commit suicide. Because in the UK, it was illegal to be gay, and therefore it was committing a crime. So the wording itself and the semantics of it maintained even after the decriminalization of homosexuality in the late 60s.
Now, we do still have some sodomy laws on the books, although they're not enforced. And even though that could be either gender, it was specifically put there, I think, as a dissuasion for gays.
I think like interracial marriage is still illegal, just like some of those stupid local laws that no one's gotten around to.
Yeah, miscegenation.
Mm-hmm.
It was 2013 and 2014. It was legalized in the UK. So yeah, pony's still older than gay marriage in the UK too, and it was 2016 for America. Speaking of just random laws of this, do you know in main Ireland, like Era of Ireland, there is still a law. Yeah, there is still a law at the moment, as far as I'm aware, that gay sex between two minors is legal as long as it is carried to fruition, and that's the phrasing. Which means that if two teenagers, one of them can't complete, or they change their minds and stop, they have technically committed a crime.
What?
Yeah.
You mean it's a crime not to come? Is that what you're trying to say?
Yes, that's exactly what I'm saying. That it's a case of if you commit, you're committed, because if you don't, you've broken the law.
I would love to pick the brain of whoever came up with that law. Just ask him why.
Come on, man. I'm trying. I'm doing my best. Come on. If you don't finish, we're both going to jail.
Like someone's sitting on the edge of the bed going, I can't. And then like, boom, the door opens and there's a SWAT team come in. Oh my god.
Boy, you better finish what you started.
Well, it'd be an Irish accent though, wouldn't it? So come on, let's have the Irish SWAT team there.
I'm sorry, where did you say this was? I heard you say Maine.
No, Ireland.
Oh, Ireland. Your British accent threw me off again. Ireland. I heard
Ireland.
Maine.
So let's hear this. Let's hear the SWAT team in your beautiful Irish voice, MP.
I can't.
You can't. You're laughing too much.
Yeah, don't equate Maine to Ireland. Here, it's only illegal to go to church without a shotgun, okay?
always after me lucky come.
No.
Goodbye.
Oh my god.
Good night.
done.
I love this podcast so
I'm
much.
done.
You say that every time, and yet you keep coming back. You said you were done after we had Cygnus riding a croissant, but now we've got the
All this demonstrates is that I have severe errors in judgment.
We all do. That's why we're here.
This might be a good time to segue back into the fic that we're reviewing today.
Can you please say it? Because I keep laughing.
So the characterization of the princesses.
I think we're on to.
We're on
I think we're on to
characterization
vinyls.
of... No, characterization of the princesses. We swapped it around
All
with
right.
Silver Streak.
All right.
Illya. It's Illya's point, so Illya has to do
Oh,
it.
you make me do this.
Yes, you do this. You can't. You don't get out of this after you made me laugh so much that I nearly fell off my chair.
I'll never be able to get a lucky come out of my mind.
Oh.
Okay.
That could be a perfectly cut scream.
And that's 2 podcasters dead.
My face hurts.
We're dropping like
Good
flies.
Gotta make it work.
Stop it!
You're killing me, Smalls.
That's
Rachel's
3.
gone.
Neighrator, which of us will die first?
This is like Hunger Games, the podcast.
Spoilers,
Which one of you's
it's
got
me.
You've got the poison berries. Oh god, I'm literally crying with laughter. Illya, you're not allowed to do that again. I will die next time. Oh god.
You didn't have a mint in your mouth at the point.
Oh, it hurts.
No. Princess's characterization. Someone take this.
Okay, this is my point. All right. The problem I have with the characterization of the princesses is that it was quite obvious that at least once one of these lichens had gone crazy and eaten a family. But nevertheless, Luna, and by proxy, Celestia, because she knew about it even if she wasn't a vampire, they were keeping a lid on this very dangerous situation where innocent people could get killed. That is not like Celestia. My Little Ponies, unless they get eaten by a lichen, they're not My Little Ponies anymore. So that's just wrong. I couldn't get on board with that.
Goombasa?
I'd like to think that at some point, Celestia and Luna would have thought to themselves, you know what? It might be a good idea for us to just slowly try to integrate these people into society. Because Celestia does have that power. If she were to come forward and say, vampires and werewolves exist, they are good people, they just need your understanding, I'd like to think that ponies would take that at face value.
I think so too. And that's exactly my point. They just kept it hidden. It's uncharacteristic of them.
Especially at the end of this story, after you almost had a water reservoir poisoned by a maniac trying to kill all these people. Like, that would probably be a moment where you would sit back and reflect and think, you know what, maybe what we're doing just isn't working.
May I offer a counterpoint? I'm sorry, when you're done.
No, I was just going to say, but there's no indication at the end of the story, and I don't even really think it's brought up that much in the story proper, or even as an offhand remark, that maybe it would be a good idea to try to slowly introduce vampirism and lichenism to the greater populace, just so that they are aware that it actually exists. Here are the signs. Here are how to tell if somebody might need some help.
There could be programs put in place to help them. I mean,
yes, exactly.
You don't do that when you hide it. It's just crazy.
So both lichens and vampires in this story have demonstrated the propensity to just sort of go off the rails, just become unhinged either on a full moon or because they get really angry and then just go on a murderous rampage. So it happened to Vinyl Scratch when Octavia confronted her, and it happened to Octavia, and she goes on a rampage and apparently mauls a rabbit to death, and rabbits are sentient in Equestria. So that's actually akin to murder. One of the problems I have with this story is, and with the princesses by extension, is that's like, no, actually, these are like really dangerous, unpredictable people. And like, I kind of see Silver's point. Like, if it's a question of survival, exposure is one thing, but I think we ought to have a question about what we ought to do with these people. It's rounding them up and putting them up in internment camps might be a little extreme, but they're actually really dangerous and unpredictable. And I kind of see your point.
What is your counterpoint? I didn't get it.
Oh, just that that lichens and vampires are actually very dangerous, and if Silver wanted to kill Silverface, whatever name is, wanted to kill them all, I think that's the discussion worth having.
But if it were common knowledge, like Illya and I were saying, if it were common knowledge that they existed, then steps could be taken to help minimize the risk. Who's to say that one of the reasons why these vampires and lichens are going crazy is because they have to keep it hidden, and they don't always have the willpower or the means to keep themselves away from the general populace when they are in situations where that might happen. Whereas if you implement programs or you make people aware of the risks of, say, a lichen being out during the full moon, then they could get help. They could go to somebody that could help them before they become a risk to somebody else.
Yeah, there could probably be a pill or something you could take during a full moon to help. I mean, there's all sorts of avenues that could be explored.
Perhaps. I mean, we didn't really get into that in the story. That's fair.
Vampires' rights now!
But it's all about how the princesses are characterized. They went with the cover-up rather than with the cure, and that's what I find objectionable.
I think a lot of this for me comes back to genre and the kind of story that we're dealing with, in that this is a paranormal romance. Pretty much what paranormal romances take for granted, and this is what the story does, is take it as common knowledge and accepted that this is how these worlds operate, is that, there is a magical world that exists completely separated from normal people for everyone's own good, whether they are wizard children or vampires and werewolves. This society must be kept secret. And that's just kind of accepted as how their world works in order for these stories to operate. And frankly, I don't even think Harry Potter deals with this well. There's not, like...
Harry Potter's shit at dealing with this.
The reason given in Harry Potter is that if witches and wizards were common knowledge, then 1, everyone would harass them for solutions to their problem, and 2, they would burn them at the stake. Again, those seem very easily overcome to me. And so I think the problem here is this story, because it's not a work of published fiction, it has no reason and makes no effort to try to make this trope work. It just uses it because it's the trope that all of these stories have. And yeah, when you frame it up against the princesses, it makes their characterization very weak. I think the justification you'd be given is that this society was formed precisely to minimize the risk to equestrians without committing genocide against werewolf and vampire victims, and that this secret society is the peaceful solution to protecting as many ponies as possible, and that's what Silverface is trying to destroy. But I agree with you all that, especially when placed up against the resources that Celestia and Luna have at their disposal, it doesn't really hold up. So yeah, I'm in complete agreement with all of you. I'm just kind of trying to explain why this happened and why it happens in a lot of stories within the past few decades.
Well, I certainly agree with you on most of those points. What I would like to know then is, would this have been a better story if we'd simply left the princesses out of it? I mean, that was possible. Then it would make more sense.
If the society had been formed and had, like, their mission was to keep the princesses from finding out, yeah, actually, I think that would fix a lot. I mean, you'd lose your obligatory Princess Luna as a fierce, fanged vampire princess warrior that the author desperately wanted to have in there. So I think that's why that happened.
They could have left Celestia out of the loop. Secret Luna has that Celestia doesn't know.
True.
But then
Yeah.
what would have happened during the time that Luna was missing? That would mean that this
Ooh.
entire secret society was either a very new thing, or Celestia is completely in the loop, or it was Celestia's idea in the first place, and Luna came back and went, oh, thank you, sister. You've made a little society for me to rule.
That's a great point. This secret society is like 6 months old in 2012.
Exactly.
Nightmare Moon had fangs. Nightmare Moon might very well have been a vampire.
Well, yeah, but she was also in the moon for the past 1,000 years.
Maybe, but the point is she couldn't have ruled it. So they have this well-established... That would mean that Vinyl has been... They talk a lot about... I'll finish a thought in a second. They talk a lot about stuff Vinyl's done in the past that was terrible. It's like, do you want it to turn out like last time? Oh, God, no, we don't want her to turn like all those other times that Vinyl went out. That would mean she's done a fucking lot of stuff in 6 months while she was living with Octavia.
She's been very busy.
Yeah, including dating the evil enemy, finding out about the evil enemy, getting dumped by the evil enemy, and going on a vendetta against the evil enemy before moving in with Octavia. The timeline of this story just had a complete wrench thrown in it.
I didn't even think of that at the time. That's a great point.
Either Celestia is completely and utterly party to this, or this society's 6 months old.
Wait, are we mixing up our speculations of how to fix the princess's characterization with what actually happens? Because I think the secret society was actually founded before Princess Luna became Nightmare Moon and was run by someone else and Celestia while she was gone.
In which case, should Celestia not have been in the fic a bit more?
Do we really need more characters?
I don't know. It might have made things make more sense.
It sure looks like a plot hole to me.
It does. I know it's not one that's going to completely and utterly change the course the fic chose to go, but it's a buggy one. I don't know. I like world building in stories, and I think that if you're going to do something like this with a supernatural world, that's my jam. I fucking love supernatural stories like this. Most of my book collection is about urban fantasy. I love it. So if you're going to do world building of this kind with a secret society, you've absolutely got my attention. But it's got to work.
Fun fact, by the way, Midori only made it through the first 4 chapters of this story, and she asked me to fill in some of the blanks for her because she was curious, and I got to the point where Luna is a vampire in this story, and I'm not kidding, there was a beat of silence, and she just walked out of the room with her hands in the air.
But of all the ponies to be vampires, Luna is a very good candidate.
Yeah.
Yeah, but Celestia isn't.
Well, no, Celestia is not a vampire in any event.
No, but...
Not unless she's Daybreaker, who also has fangs.
Oh, God. Pony's so hot.
Here's the thing.
There's the 4th.
There's the 4th.
Goodbye.
Neighrator, you are last pony standing.
I'm going to get the pot. This is great.
Do we have anything in the pot?
Let's have a pot next time.
All our broken hopes and dreams. There we go. You get them.
Oh, great.
Yeah. Fun fact. I was caught between 2 different stories for this podcast. I knew that I already had 2 picked for whenever my choice came up next. One was this story, and one was I Daybreaker. I really kind of wish I'd chosen I Daybreaker.
Ooh.
Yeah. Because that one actually is a legit good story.
Well, at any rate, I think we agree. The princesses are kind of along with Vinyl and Octavia in just kind of being vehicles for the story. And especially in terms of lining up with show ideas, it ranges from barely workable with suspension of disbelief to outright offensive, depending on how attached you are to your princesses. I think we're all in agreement on that point.
That said, I do love the running gag of Luna thumping her head against the wall whenever Vinyl does something stupid.
That is lovely.
It's like, there's that moment when Vinyl goes rogue, and the next chapter opens with thump, thump, thump. Princess, are you okay? Give me a minute. Thump, thump, thump. Right, I can... Wait, no. Thump, thump, thump. Right, now I'm done.
We all have those moments.
And I did like that. That was the point where the story was leaning more into comedy, and I was like, no, I like this. This is the kind of story I do like. And it reminded me very much of 2 of my favourite authors, or 2 of my favourite book series, I should say. One is Stephanie Plum by Janet Abanovich, and one is by Mary Janice Davidson called Queen Betsy of the Vampires. NP, that is the story.
Both terrific, yes.
I gave you that one and didn't realise how many sex scenes there were in that book when I gave it to you. And I listened to it after I given it to you, then had to contact you afterwards going, I'm so sorry. I did not realize how much of this book was just porn.
Scribbler sends me porn sometimes. It's fine.
Not on purpose.
Let's say,
No,
do
it
you
happens
realize
to me
what you
too.
are saying on this podcast?
To be perfectly frank, it's not the first time I've accidentally done that. Literally, when I very first time I met Lost, and she was working at this data entry center and had like 4 a.m. starts, and she used to listen to podcasts while she was at work. And I sent her this audiobook of this from a book series that I hadn't yet listened to. And went, well, I've got this. Here, have this. And then I listened to it that night. Yeah. It's a full cast audiobook. It's basically like a werewolf version of Wooten stuff. Put it that way. Full cast. And I had to contact Lost, who I'd known for less than a week. And had to contact her afterwards and go, I am so sorry. I did not know. I am so... Please don't judge me. That's not the kind of person I am. I'm not a creep.
You did the same thing with me too.
Oh,
by
fuck,
the way.
did I?
Oh my god!
It
I had no
was,
idea this
did
was
I
such
give
a
you?
trend.
It was during the very first month of Lerv,
Oh,
and I came to
God.
you and I said, I'm having a little bit of trouble finding some good romance stories to do for it. And you sent me a whole bunch of them that I did end up reading, but one of them that you sent me was, I don't know, I don't think you had actually read any of it, just the
Clearly not.
description. And it was a story about a royal guard deciding that he was going to kill himself after he raped all of the elements of harmony.
Ah!
I don't remember
Oh,
that
God.
at all.
Yeah. I started doing an initial read through of each of the stories, and I got to that one, and I'm like, well, this looks like it's going to be a bit of a black comedy. Oh my god, I don't think I can read this one.
I don't remember, and I'm so sorry.
It's fine. It was a mistake, but
Yeah,
it gave me a
most
great
definitely
story.
was. Holy shit!
Wow!
Stop laughing, Thorny.
This explains this list of Rara Jacks that Scribbler just sent me, because let me tell you...
Oh, Thorny.
no.
No, please.
I'm
Don't say
kidding.
I've done it again.
I'm kidding, actually.
That is not the thing I want to be known for.
It was just
I liked
too...
it better when people just knew me for my catchphrase.
It was just too perfect, considering you just sent me a list of ship fics to investigate.
Holy
I'm like,
Christ,
oh no, what
No.
might be in there?
No.
Oh my god. I've only read about half of them, but there
I
has...
don't make a habit of sending people porn. To be fair, Neighrator, you are worse at that than me. I remember the great Skype downloads.
Everyone has forgotten about that by now.
No
one remembers that happening.
Never forget.
Look, if my transgressions are getting announced, we're not forgetting that one.
Shit!
Oh my Christ.
Well, this has backfired on me in a major way. Let's move on to the next point.
And I am giving no context or explanation for why Neighrator is now so angry with me.
Oh my Christmas Christ on a stick.
Finals family casting. Her mom is photo finish and her dad is hoity-toity. What's with that?
Go on then, Neighrator. What is with that?
Kids. Just, the next point is, so yeah, Vinyl's parents are photo finish and hoity-toity, which I don't think are old enough, and the timeline doesn't work, but it wouldn't be the first time in this fic. So what do we think about this this casting choice in particular?
Well, that one was submitted by the operating system.
I reckon it was like the
It says OS.
couple picker.
Yeah, that was your point, Scribbler. Why am I reading it? So yeah, but yeah,
Because I couldn't stop laughing, that's why. And apparently whenever I talk now, I'm accidentally saying porny things, so...
Okay, in short, yeah, I thought that was a really weird choice for a lot of reasons, to say nothing of the fact that Photo Finish and Hoity Toity have their own very distinctive accents, and Vinyl has neither of those, and also they're both vampires, and I just
Although
didn't
their
like that
accents
part.
are admitted to be fake later on. Like she tells
I think
Octavia that
was.
both her parents fake their accents. Although, is it just me? Hoity Toity is fashioned after a real person, isn't he?
So is Photo Finish.
See, I didn't know that about Photo Finish, but I know that the person Hoity Toity is fashioned after is, in real life, gay. So I'd always coded him as gay. So therefore him coming up in this as Vinyl's father was like, what?
Well, metrosexual is a thing.
I know
they still use that
metrosexual
word.
is a thing, but it was more like, I don't know, I felt like it was a bit not nice to take one of the show's, admittedly not canonically, but more likely canonically than not, gay characters and make him hetero just for the sake of a joke.
In fairness, one, that is problematic. Two, I had no idea about that either. I'm curious if I even... You know what? I'm going to go look at like the MLB wiki and see if any of that info is there and if they would have been able to find that out.
I remember that he was based after a real person because that was information I learned early on in the fandom when that episode first came out.
And photo finish was based off, I think her name is Zsa Zsa Gabor or something like that.
She's named after Zsa Zsa Gabor.
No, she wasn't. She was based on a fashion designer that I have about 100 pictures of, so I think she's so beautiful, even though she's about 100 years old.
Who's
and
that?
I'm trying. Well, I can go in my other computer and look, but I've forgotten. I do names so poorly. And her name should be right on the tip. Yeah, on the tip of my tongue, it should be. She always wears this page boy hairdo, got these big glasses.
Okay, I'm on the wiki. Photo Finish is a female earth pony and famous fashion photographer in Equestria. She's in the opening sequence. I swear. Oh, yeah, here we go. Photo Finish heavily resembles the iconic editor-in-chief of Vogue magazine, Anna Wintour.
Anna Wintour, yes.
Where did I get Zsa Zsa Gabor from then?
The accent, probably.
Anna Wintour has a sort of reputation for being harsh.
She's the one that The Devil Wears Prada is based on.
Right, exactly. And you know how I am with the bad girls. So she's just so beautiful to me. I just love her.
Okay, so I don't know if this is in defense of the author or not, but if you go to the MLP wiki and look up Hoity Toity, you will see that his design is based off of, I very well might mispronounce this name, Karl Lagerfeld, one of those two maybe.
Okay.
And if you follow that link to Karl Lagerfeld's Wikipedia page, and you read through his entire Wikipedia page and his personal life, you should probably get the understanding that he was probably gay. But that is a lot of work to do for a background character. I don't know that I demand that of fandom authors, to know the sexualities of real life people that background ponies might be based off of.
I would say that, except that I knew that, and I'd not read the wiki. It was just common knowledge of people who knew it, and it was common knowledge at the time. It may have fallen more into obscurity now, but it was definitely a talking point back in 2012.
It's not terribly uncommon for gay men to marry women and have children.
That is also true. I don't know. I think we can peg that as a point that is possibly problematic.
I think possibly problematic is a good way to pin that. That it wasn't, if it is problematic, it wasn't intentionally so, unlike later stuff.
Yeah, also fair.
Still, it meant that I was just there going, what? At her family. It felt like it was for a cheap joke.
It was a very weird pairing, yes.
Yeah. And again, I don't think the timeline works out.
They don't look anything like Vinyl, and they're both Earth ponies. So we've got effectively two Earth ponies gave birth to a unicorn, and two unicorns gave birth to Octavia.
So,
important to remember, the Cake Twins.
Hey, Thorny!
I was gonna say that's the thing I'm just about to follow up. As for Vinyl's family casting, I actually thought it was hilarious. Just because, of course it's trope. Octavia's parents are the stuffy ones, so of course Vinyl's are the more friendly, outgoing ones. But I actually thought it was hilarious because it's very obvious. The reason the author chose these characters is because all three of them, Vinyl, Photo, and Hoity Toity, always wear sunglasses. That's their link. And I'm not gonna lie, I kind of found that hilarious.
I didn't even make that connection.
And so, speaking as someone who wrote a fanfic where the entire thing is based off of Mr. Cake vaguely looking like Sunburst, who might vaguely, in a dark room and under the influence of alcohol, also look like Rainbow Dash's childhood bully Hoops. Given that's the basis of their connection, I'm okay with this one.
And that to be fair,
Fair.
that entire connection was made on a cracked out car journey where we'd been awake for 24 hours and were very, very sleep deprived after a 3-day con.
But the question was, did it work?
You made it work.
So I'm just saying,
It's
the
not
fact
a concept that would have worked in anybody else's capable hands.
the fact that these are unified only by that they wear sunglasses, that's their character design. I find that amusing, and I appreciate that the author. I thought that was a little bit creative. Also, I never was clear if these are Vinyl's biological parents or her vampiric parents, if this universe draws a difference between the two, and there is no world building on that front, and I'm not really sure I'm interested in figuring it out either.
We say that it's a strange pairing, or at least I said it was a strange pairing, but then I remember this is the MLP fandom where a rock and a tree have been shipped together before, and there have been some very, very interesting pairings over the years that I have to admit I actually think have worked, depending on the skill of the writer. So, yeah.
I think the absurdity helps it work because Vinyl's a little out there, and to have her family like that just sort of adds a little bit of cream on the cake. I like it.
She certainly got a nicer family on this story than I gave her in Vampirelance.
All three characters also do have very extreme personalities, so it jives well enough there as well.
Shall we move on?
Yes, let's move on.
Just because I've realised it's 2 hours and 5 minutes in, and in the last hour we've discussed 2 sub-points to a previous point.
We're going to break the record.
Let's see if we can speed this up just a hair would be good.
I mean, to be fair, we've talked about a lot of the stuff in the later, like the dialogue and things like that, and Jumping the Shark. We've kind of touched on them. Right.
Yes.
Octavia's cliched OC family. Posh ponies who look down on everyone else as being beneath them. Plus, unicorn parents of an Earth pony daughter who push her extra hard because she is lacking in their eyes due to not also being a unicorn. How do we feel about this? Because this is a trend I have noticed in several stories regarding Octavia. Why is this a thing? Do we think it works here?
I think it's just a plausible backstory. I'm sorry, and I spoke out of turn.
No,
I think it's
it's
just. Fine. We see it so often just because it seems plausible.
Tony?
Well, I'm with you. It's an old trope that is given absolutely no new life in this story. I think it would be hard to give it new life at all. I'm not saying there's no value in having very classist parents who basically look at their daughter, who she is, what her career is, and are just borderline abusive in saying you're not even our level, that sort of thing. But it's not done well here. I think the unicorn parents just being overbearing and snooty, that's from the show. Because, Canterlot is shown to be, we're talking about the first 2 seasons, but it's across all of it, but especially in the first 2 seasons. The unicorns live in Canterlot. They walk around with their noses in the air, literally. They all have a fair amount of wealth. They have the fancy accents. Even Rarity is portrayed as being kind of the more judgmental and snooty sometimes of the main 6. It's just this connotation that, the pony kinds have different traits, and that's not a great thing either. And the unicorns are the ones who, embrace the finer things and the academics and the wealth. And of course, they have magic, so they don't even need to get their hooves dirty. It all kind of feeds into this. And this story does absolutely nothing new with any of the ideas.
Illya?
Well, Octavia is the cello player in the Royal Pony Harmonica Orchestra. So she'd have to be pretty darn good. And so she would have probably been pushed extra hard by her parents. And I think they fit the bill for that. So I think it's probably pretty good.
Goombasa?
This is an element that could have been better if there had been more time spent on it. By the time that we meet her parents, the fic is already experiencing a bit of schizophrenia when it comes to what it wants to be. But if more of an emphasis had been put on actually fleshing out her parents and their expectations of her beyond the base cliche, it could have been more interesting. But as it stands, it's mostly just played for comedy when Vinyl accidentally punches out Octavia's mother. And that is about the only thing about her parents that I remember from this fic.
And I do have to add, that is probably one of the only original things this story does do. Because again, I maintain my claim that Octavia and her family are lifted straight from university days. Octavia is a little bit neurotic because her parents want her to be the pinnacle of excellence and, the picture of a professional, noble, talented character or whatnot. And so, she's neurotic. But I will give this fic credit. I have never actually seen Vinyl punch out Octavia's mother in a bathroom. That was unique, and that's probably the reason why we remember it.
I think sometimes a cliche is just the right way to go. It works.
So, Obnit, pony racism and its portrayal in fanfictions. Why are unicorns always cast as snobs and horrible toward Earth ponies in a way that was never established in the show, especially at this point in canon? And by that I mean, yeah, unicorns were established as snobs in Canterlot, especially the way that Thornquill said. But in fanfiction, it tended to go beyond just the posh Canterlot unicorns, and it tended to be that unicorns throughout Equestria were especially horrible to Earth ponies. And I don't... Where did this come from, and why was it so prevalent? So, Illya, you seem to have a penchant for this one. Go on.
All right. I mean, Celestia has established a school for gifted unicorns. As far as I know, she doesn't have any school for gifted Pegasi or gifted Earth ponies. So it sort of comes down from the top that the unicorns are the important ponies in Equestria. And I think it probably just bleeds out throughout the entire kingdom. It just makes sense to me.
So why do you reckon it's in fan fiction so much? Why did people run with this? Go on,
people are
Goombasa.
racist.
Okay. Yeah,
People are racist. Ponies would be racist.
I want my Pastel Pony universe to not have shit like this in it.
I think one of the places where it really started, or at least a place where I really saw it start, was during what was the name of the episode? The first Hearthswarming episode, where we sort of get the backstory for Equestria and how the three tribes came together. And in that episode, during the flashback / play that the elements are putting on, you do see a very clear divide in wealth and living conditions and sort of philosophy for how the three tribes as separate units sort of lived. The Princess Platinum's kingdom was very opulent and very, very large, whereas you go to Chancellor Puddinhead and the Earth ponies and it's very dirty. And then you go to the Pegasi with Commander Hurricane and it's all very, very warrior-like. And so I think... what's that? Spartan? Yeah, that's a better way of putting it. But I think a lot of people saw this and just started to think about the differences between the three tribes and started to run with it at that point, sort of taking those differences and starting to apply equestrian history to the present.
And it's a fantasy trope, honestly, is that you have your races that are more fine and well-to-do and but they also are more difficult to approach, and you've got your more down-to-earth, rough-and-tumble races,
elves versus dwarves.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking is Lord of the Rings and oh god, what was it, that Will Smith thing that came out on Netflix? Bright.
And
where
it's
they had
not...
the orcs and Elf District, which was passed as being like Beverly Hills.
And it's not a good trope. And I can't really blame MLP for falling into it because so much fantasy falls so easily into the trope, and it's a children's show. It's not thinking about, what are the more complex ways that we can portray, race for our, very young audience, especially at this point. This episode aired in 2011. They were not thinking about us when they aired it. Which, I mean, that's not an excuse.
who was it in chat pointed out that there was Chancellor Naysay was a fairly recent addition to all this. Kind of, I say like, oh, pony racism wasn't really a thing back then, but then it very much became not even a subtext thing, but an actual text thing with Chancellor Naysay closing the school. Who was
That
it?
was me.
Was it? Yeah, I'd forgotten about him. Please, I haven't. Okay, spoilers for actual MLP now. I haven't watched past the second episode of season 8. Please tell me Naysay gets redeemed or at least beaten up.
Sort of proven wrong. Yeah, I think he's still around in the later part of season 8. Also,
He's proven wrong, but does he accept that he's wrong? Because there's a difference between somebody proving you wrong and then you wander off going, huh, like that food critic character who couldn't accept that bland wasn't everything.
I'll be honest, I don't actually remember.
He does accept that he was wrong during the finale when the student 6 do help him out, and he sees all of them working together. But before that, no, it was in that scene that he basically accepts he was wrong. But like most things in MLP, there was no real build up to the turn.
Right.
I think we're framing this entire discussion improperly. What we have in the ponies is not so much race as a class struggle. Even in a lot of the fan fictions, it's written that before there was alicorns, that the unicorns were the ruling class, and I think it's always been that way. And I think they see themselves in terms of class rather than race. Now, the racism would be something that would extend to the griffins or to the yaks or some other species, that sort of thing. And you really don't see a lot of racism in that sense in My Little Pony, but you do see the class struggles.
The difficulty I have with that argument is that, yes, it's a classist argument, but it's a classist argument where the class is the race. Because obviously the unicorns, it's split up more in most of the show because obviously the races are unified roughly at that point. But especially in the Hearthswarming episode, it's very clear that all the unicorns, live this way, and all the earth ponies live this way, and the earth ponies have to give them food so that they'll keep, raising and lowering the sun, which is ridiculous because if they didn't, they'd starve. But like unicorns would starve too. I think my overarching thoughts on race in My Little Pony is that the show handles it very clumsily. What? Poorly. I thought you said my name.
No, they don't handle it thorny.
It handles it very clumsily. It tries sometimes. And the fact that it's handled clumsily is not a surprise to me. It's kind of like asking Disney to handle LGBTQ issues very well and prominently. We wish they would. It would be so much better if they did, but the fact that they don't, these are not the places that we look to lead on this issue, unfortunately.
That said, Disney did in fact include multiple LGBT couples on an episode of Star vs. the Forces of Evil, where these two characters go to a concert and a love song comes on, and all these couples in the audience start gazing into each other's eyes and kissing, and some of them are LGBT. Which sounds great, up until the point where you realise that my fucking country re-edited the episode when it went on telly and took them out.
But was that really Disney, or was that the creators of the show themselves, and Disney just shrugged their shoulders?
Do you really imagine that the Mouse House is going to let anything get out of their doors that they don't approve of? They have absolute control over everything that goes on their channels. I 100% believe that if they had not wanted it to go in, it wouldn't be in.
Well, yeah, now that it's good marketing.
Now that it is, but I still appreciated even that much. And at that point in time when it came out, it's like, oh, so it's not being a very special episode. It's just like, gay people exist and they're in this world and there you go. And I liked that approach.
At the very least, it's better than writing something out or showing something and then saying after the fact that a character was LGBT.
Well, no, that's J.K. Rowling's.
No, Disney did it too. Disney did it too with the
which one?
live action Beauty and the Beast.
Okay.
Which one was it? Yeah, it was Gaston's. LeFou. Gaston's Yes Man.
Again, just going to refer Starburst the Force of Evil. There is a canonically gay character in that who has a massive crush on Star, the main character, and like it's really obvious she's got a crush on her and has just followed her around the whole time and talks about her in a romantic way. And she's like a member of the first circle of supporting cast. So it can be done in a way that's subtle yet really obvious.
I think
I just wish MLP did it.
I think where I'm left on this, on some of these bigger media things, MLP included, is that, how to put, it's a difficult balance that I still don't know if I know how to strike, between having these discussions and saying fan creators can do better with representation, professional creators can do better with representation, and insisting that they do better with representation, and not completely destroying it when it gets it wrong, especially taking the stages of development into context. That sounds like I'm making excuses for these failings, and I don't want to do that. Like I said, it's kind of part of that difficult balance that I have with these subjects.
Well, you need to realize that these television corporations and things are corporations, and they have bottom lines and things, and they have to really think hard about every decision they make. And I doubt that any of them really want to be the pioneer. Most of them want to follow.
It would be the advertisers who decide everything. It'd be the shareholders and the advertisers. And if it doesn't matter how progressive your network, your creator, your writer, your voice actor, your director, it does not matter any of that. If you take it up to the advertisers conference in New York and nobody bids on your advertising space because they don't want to be associated with you. Like, I remember reading Tina Fey's autobiography where she talked about that. And I had no idea that's how it works in America, where you have, where there is a big conference where advertisers bid for advertising space on pilots of shows, and that's how these series get made. I had no idea that's how it goes there, because that's not how it works in the UK. So that was a proper eye-opener to me of, that's why so much stuff just doesn't go into shows, because no advertiser, there probably were shows that had that in it, but no advertiser bid on it. So that's why it didn't get made.
If someone happens to stumble into it and it makes money, well, then they'll all jump on. But nobody wants to be the pioneer and take the first step and be the one that might lose a big lot of money on something like that.
Exactly. And like I said, that was a proper eye-opener for me, because I did not know that's how it worked, but it made so much more sense afterwards. And in some ways, fandom and fan fictions and fan art and things is so much freer in that regard for
That's why I love it
self-expression.
so much.
Exactly.
I love fan fiction.
Right?
This is, and like the Tina Fey thing, I read that years ago. Seeker was still alive when I read that, because I remember her sitting with her head on my knee as I was reading this and going, the fuck? So, yeah, I've fallen incredibly hard for fandom many, many years ago, and that just reinforced my love, because we can do stuff that canonical shows can't. But it does mean that because we've got that extra freedom, it's almost like we judge fandom works more harshly or harsher. I don't know what the grammar's like in that sentence. Because there is that freedom. And if people don't take advantage of that freedom, it almost feels, I don't know, like you've been cheated a bit. I don't know where this point is going.
Well, I think part of that comes down to authorial intent and how developed, well, not even authorial, creator intent, and how far developed a creator is in their understanding of these issues. Because 9 times out of 10, when a creator does this, it's a mistake that they make because they just haven't been exposed to the idea that something is a problematic portrayal, or to doing it differently, because so much media does everything the exact same way. So I think the important takeaway for anyone doing fan creations is just to stay open-minded to looking at things that you're pretty used to doing. And if you get the sense, maybe this isn't the best way to be doing it, there might be a better way, or maybe I can, learn how to do this in a more complex and real way, to stay open to learning about that, and as you keep creating, do it better next time. It's like, do I blame the author of My Roommate is a Vampire for having very simplistic unicorn versus earth pony racism? Not really. If they had kept writing, I would like to see that become more complex. I think that is the key for me.
Let's also not forget that we're exceptions in that we are quite significantly older than the general demographic of people who write fanfiction. It does tend to be people in high school and college who've got time who write fanfiction. And although the demographic is moving up as people age, like the dawn of social media and things has definitely meant that there has been a switch up in the general age of fandoms. That like Pony's 10 years old. We know Pony's 10 years old, and the fandom is at least 9 years old. But that means that people who got into it at the start, like us, we're 9 years older than we were when we got into it. So,
oh, please don't remind me.
Remind you.
The demographic of fandom and writing fanfiction tends to be people who have the disposable time to spend on it, which means that it skews quite young. And people who skew quite young and are writing fanfiction aren't necessarily going to have very immature opinions, and their writing style is not necessarily going to have developed much at that point. So can we really expect them to have written these more complex interpretations when they haven't got that life experience yet?
And probably not necessarily, but the important thing is that more complex and real portrayals that enter fiction, either fan fiction or published, the more used those up-and-coming writers get to these better, more developed ways of doing it. And they'll start doing it more intuitively rather than relying on these older, more simplistic tropes.
Which all says that we should teach fanfiction in schools instead of maths.
I mean...
You know?
Yes.
You know?
I am one of the... I sound like I'm going to argue with you. I'm not. I'd honestly be... I don't know at what point I would introduce it, but if you ask me, fan works will probably enter more and more into the academic side of conversation as time goes on. And I think that's a good thing.
I think it would. I think it is too, for all the reasons we talked about.
I do too, but I think that something that would help both maths and fictions and everything else would be if schools taught more critical thinking skills. That's what we really need.
No, what we really need, we have fan fiction. What we really need is fan math.
Fucking don't, no.
What?
Like, oh
No.
man, I ship imaginary numbers and I don't know, square numbers so hard.
Okay,
I hate
NP
you.
is
I hate
drunk.
you so much.
No, NP, you say that, but Disney already made a cartoon about it. It's called The Dot and the Line.
What?
Does nobody
my
remember
God, I
that
remember
cartoon? Yeah,
Holy
thank
shit, I
you.
remember it. Oh my god, I forgot about that.
Which was
Oh.
actually based on a novella called A Mathematical Romance.
Okay,
I have
completely
no
forgot
memory
about
of any
that.
of this.
No,
I
it was that
remember
cute
I
little
do.
cartoon about a blue line that is in love with a red dot, but she's in love with just the black scribble. So he has to find a way to romance her, and he finds out by using geometry he can twist and bend his entire body into these beautiful geometric shapes, and he uses that to impress her and win over her love.
When math professors write fanfic.
It
I
is.
admit, I do
Well,
not.
to be fair, Lewis Carroll was a mathematician, and he wrote Alice in Wonderland. So when you
But
put
he was
mathematicians,
on lots of drugs.
maybe I didn't say that we shouldn't give mathematicians drugs before they write fan fiction. Just saying that it helps.
Maybe we should move on.
We just seem to have strayed quite wildly from the point. Well, how did we get here?
We were talking about vampire lesbian horses at some point, weren't we?
I
Can
think so.
we get back to the vampire lesbian horses, please?
In fairness, that was the most serious of the talking points.
It was, and we still managed to get onto talking about why we should give mathematicians drugs and give them fanfiction to write.
That's just us. That's no surprise to anyone at this point.
I love the fact that we do sometimes have quite serious talking points and we dissect the writing process in huge amounts of detail and then throw in random dick jokes and drug references. So buried under all of our humorous bullshit, we sometimes have good points. That should be our tagline.
Oh my god.
You know, I'll probably do it at some point. Buried under our bullshit, we actually have pretty good talking points. Come join us for our
Every once in a while,
pastel
we
pony
talk about
literature. Every once in a while,
we talk about the points on the doc, even.
Like quality of the writing.
Actually, start. All right. Yeah.
Segue,
okay.
do it.
Fucking hell, it's my point. Oh no. Quality of the writing. How is it in our estimation? Does anything stand out? In particular, pacing. How do we feel about the structure of this fic? I think this fic was so poorly paced in the beginning. Like,
yeah.
If I had not had to read it for this podcast, I would have given up halfway through. Because this is purely personal, but for me, all the good stuff was in the last third of this story. And I would not, it's 54,000 words, I would not have got that far of my own volition. I would have given up. Because the first few chapters are just horribly paced.
As in too slow, too fast?
Too scattershot and quick. Anything that resembled actual characterization was just kind of skipped over like a stone going across lily pads. Every so often we might bump into something interesting, but we never stayed there long enough to find out what it was.
Yeah, I can agree with that.
And just, it's bizarre how quickly everything happened. I genuinely don't remember why Octavia and Vinyl ended up moving in with each other in the first place, because it was dealt with in like half a line at the very start. And their entire relationship seemed to just kind of happen in the blink of an eye. But Octavia was so fucking weird at the start. There is at one point, while Vinyl's asleep, apropos of nothing, Octavia wiggles her way up the bed and pulls off her sleeping mask to see what colour her eyes are. I'm like, this is so fucking creepy right now. Like, if that was a male pony, that would be so fucking creepy.
Yeah.
But it just, because we don't linger on it for more than 3 lines, it's like boom, 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 we're on, we're doing this, and then suddenly she's been bitten and bleeding. Well, that happened so fast. And it was the establishing chapters, the stuff that's supposed to hook you in the first place, and instead it just kind of flung you into a narrative and expected you to understand what was going on. And am I right in recalling there were no scene transitions in the first few chapters?
You're quite right. Yeah, it jumped around a lot. It was very disjointed.
I genuinely had trouble following what was going on.
There was even some time. There were some time jumps. A couple.
Exactly.
That I didn't like.
I didn't like the pacing in the first few chapters. I do think it improved immensely by the end. And like I said, for me, the last third of this story redeemed the entire thing. Because without hyperbole, I legit enjoyed the last third of this story. When it went all the hunter cell, whatever. And yeah, that bit I liked. I did say that I thought that I was going to be in the minority when I posted this in chat and said, no, I think the bit that everybody else hates is the bit I'm going to like. It's like The Last Jedi, where I was the only one in the entire fucking cinema who liked the bit in the casino with the giant rabbit horses running through the streets. That was my favourite bit of the whole film. Nobody agreed with me. And I think this story might be the same. So clearly, I've just got rubbish taste.
Well, right. I like Jar Jar Binks, so I'm the rubbishist.
Come to my hill, Illya. We will die on it together. Right, Thornquill, you want to take this one up now?
I'm just going to leave that hill alone because, my God, we don't have 8 hours here.
No, not that hill. We're not. Okay.
Nope.
Apart from that random siphoning, we are not touching Star Wars, okay?
Nope.
No.
That is why I said that.
I do not want to have to add all Star Wars words to my list of banned words in the comments.
Anyway, nah, I agree with you completely. And again, I think it's just because, especially at the start, the author was just sitting there going, what happens next? What happens next? What happens next? Idea. And just following their ideas wherever they took them. And there was no structure or planning, and almost certainly no revision. And I think they definitely improve by the end. You're right. I think it's just because that's what you do when you write several thousand words. You get better. And I think they finally got enough of their ideas together. And maybe they just got a big enough idea that they could stay settled with it for long enough that the pacing evened out. But yeah, seriously, at the beginning, it just bounces around so incredibly much. It's extremely hard to follow.
Goombasa?
Yeah, no, you guys pretty much nailed it. I honestly have very little to add on that front. I will say that in keeping with a later point that we're getting to about the tonal shift, I do think that the sudden shift to more natural pacing actually made the latter half of the story feel a bit more glacial to me, but I think that was just the fact that I was trying to adjust from the breakneck pace of the first half.
Neighrator?
I think I said this before, but yeah, just the way it jumps around so much, and the fact that it's so people have said that the author's writing and style improved towards the end. To be honest, I would have preferred that it used the same tone throughout. I thought the inconsistency was even more jarring than the hopping around with the the tonal shifts and everything else. So yeah, I have issues with the writing style.
Well, we're going to get onto that next, so I'll just get Illya's impression of the writing style, and then I'll let you have free reign when you talk about that narrative. So, Illya, what did you think of the pacing of this?
It was jumpy. I mean, I don't know any other way to say it, especially in the beginning. Octavia suddenly fell in love. Vinyl tried to kill her, but no, wait a minute. She loves me. I won't kill her. I'll love her. It was clunky. There would be long passages leading up to this, then suddenly 3 or 4 quick emotional shifts in a long passage. I found the pacing erratic.
Mm-hmm.
That's it.
Did we lose Scribbler?
Scribbler?
No, sorry,
Oh,
I was pushing
Are
the
you
wrong
still
button.
there?
Shut up. Don't laugh at me. I was pushing shift when I was supposed to be on caps lock. I'm just talking to a mic and nobody can hear me. To be honest, that's most of my life. Such a crushing reality. The writing style, is it consistent? Is it a problem? Neighrator, you wrote this point, so you want to take it?
It is inconsistent and it's problematic.
How is it inconsistent? How? You need to explain this. How do you find it inconsistent, and why do you find that problematic?
Specifically,
because the rest of us have said we kind of like it as it went through the fic, but clearly you didn't. So why? Yeah,
so for sort of what you might consider the first act, where the writing style, it jumps. You'll see just like chapter breaks, like every couple of paragraphs, really. It jumps around a lot, and and if that's the author's style, if that's the way the fic wants to be written, then I say stay with it. But towards the end there, we started getting more sort of conventional writing style, where it was written in third person. Am I right?
No, it was always first person.
Was it? Okay, like I said,
Yeah.
I read this fic about 6 weeks ago, and some of the finer details are slipping me by.
That at least was consistent.
It just sort of in the style itself, the length started to be more conventional towards the end, and I didn't like that as much. I thought, the inconsistency bothered me, but you guys tell me what you think.
Goombasa?
Most of my problems with it come from the tonal shift, which is our next point. But yeah, that combined with the pacing just makes the whole thing feel very erratic. I do think that it got better as time went on, when it sort of finally started to solidify some sort of identity for itself. But the writing style itself was all over the place. It felt more like the author was experimenting as they went along and trying to figure out exactly what sort of voice worked for this story.
I mean, it wouldn't surprise me at all if that's exactly what they did.
Explain?
I think he explained it for me. It's not consistent. It does jump around because, like I said, I just don't think any of this was planned out. So the fact that he eventually settled on something, again, with a different story, a different author, and a different intent, you might have expected them to go back and apply and rewrite everything so it would be consistent once they had finally found that voice. And that's not what happened here.
I was just going to make a joke about how that just feeds into the idea that fanfic writing is also called first draft writing.
Life is first draft writing. Illya?
There was one way this fic had a consistent writing style and tone. And it's in a point that I brought up later. I thought the dialogue was very consistent, very well done, and very consistent. I followed the story pretty much all the way through the dialogue. In fact, there would be certain points during the action sequences when I would just sort of speed read and skip right through the action and just come right to the dialogue and read the story through the dialogue itself rather than through the descriptors. And in that particular way, I think the story had some consistency just because of the dialogue.
I must admit, I loved the dialogue at places. Not the banana joke. But
no, not the banana joke.
Notable exception, yes.
Yeah, there are notable exceptions. There are different points in the story. It's like, this could be better. But the author has a definite flair for witty dialogue to the point where I think they'd be better off writing scripts than writing fics.
Kind of like Joss Whedon.
Yeah. Yeah, actually, I definitely agree with that.
Yeah.
Without the infidelity on his wife part.
No, I mean, I definitely agree that the dialogue is probably the strongest point, and I know that I've said that this author didn't do anything with these characters that we didn't see in other Octoscratch fics. But with that being said, they do know how to write the default Octavia and Vinyl Scratch fairly well. The witty banter is especially strong. So yeah, while I would have liked to have seen maybe some more original ideas thrown in, the mastery of the dialogue is definitely worth complimenting.
I will say there were certain points where they started to sound like each other. I think I said at the start of this podcast 3 million years ago that they are kind of receptacles for witty dialogue rather than characters at points.
I do find that happens for me with Octoscratch in general, just because the standard story flow is for Octavia to be charmed by Vinyl's rakish wit and to loosen up and kind of reject some of the stodgier aspects of her upbringing, including half the time her mother. And so, you know, she'll start to embrace a little bit more flair, throw in a bit more slang, and just be a bit more Vinylish because it's fun to be that way. And she'll start to drift towards being Vinyl in a way in a lot of these stories.
And then they file off the numbers and make it Lyra Bon.
Depending on how Lyra and Bonbon are written, yes.
Yeah, truth.
I will say just the briefest note, if I had to advise on writing Lyra Bon versus Octoscratch, I noticed that Bonbon especially is more blunt than Octavia. Octavia is very proper, and if she's written under the best circumstances, she'd be like Shadow of Cygnus, where she cuts your head off and you didn't even notice that there was a sword. Bonbon's more of a sledgehammer. But that's a very brief off-topic note, just in like, if you do want to write them different, that's one way you can do it.
Taking notes for the future.
I think you're right.
Just a bit of brief commentary on how fandom usually portrays these characters. Yes, MP, you are in charge.
Yeah, okay. Is that all we wanted to say about tonal shift, or should we move on to the next point?
The next point is tonal shift, isn't it?
Beg your pardon. Yes, of course. Okay, who wants to start?
It's Goombasa's.
This was my point, and I bring it up because we've actually brought it up several times during this discussion already. But the massive tonal shift that this story takes about halfway through was the biggest point of contention for me. And I'm a person who really likes to see an author attempt like a tonal shift or even a genre shift, because if it's pulled off well, it can be a really interesting way of sort of turning a story on its head or taking it in a brand new direction. I think a story that does this very, very well is a few years ago, there was an anime that came out called Samurai Flamenco. And when it started out, it was a story about a male model who wanted to, now that he was financially stable, wanted to become a superhero and live out his dream of just helping people. This is not a science fiction story. It is very grounded in reality. He has no combat training. He's wealthy, but not Batman wealthy. And he ends up getting his ass kicked a lot. The early story of the anime reminds me a lot of if Kick-Ass actually had a little bit of optimism in its story. But then about halfway through the story, not even halfway, about a third of the way through the show, we get to a point where we are introduced to the threat of the day, and it is a semi-intelligent, mutated gorilla with a hole in its stomach that it uses to decapitate its enemies with the guillotine hidden in its chest. And there is there is very little buildup to this sudden appearance, because at that point, like I said, the story has been relatively grounded in reality. There are no science fiction elements in the story. You could say at most it takes place in the near future, but at its core, despite the sudden appearance of a giant mutated guillotine gorilla, the story is still at its core a superhero story. And it's also helped by the fact that nobody in the story is able to deal with this right away. Everybody is shocked by the sudden appearance of what is essentially a comic book monster in their world. And it's fascinating and amazing. And from that point onward, the story slowly shifts from a slice of life story about a guy living out his childhood dream to try and become a hero and help people, to a guy who has to become a superhero to fight off an alien invasion.
You know, another franchise that I think pulled off tonal shift well is Avatar: The Last Airbender. And it's not nearly as extreme as having guillotine gorillas. It's more subtle for me. Because initially, when I first started trying to watch that show, I didn't care for it all that much. Because the first season especially is more of is trying to fit in with Nickelodeon a little bit, I think, is my theory. It's more simplistic. There's a lot more childish humor in it, and it's not very epic. Whereas by the end, you have something that is almost downright Shakespearean with family abuse, trauma, just airships exploding, and epic as all get out. And it's pulled off better in Avatar because the tonal shift is a bit more subtle. It transitions more between the 3 seasons. It's spread out, whereas in this fic, the tonal shift is in one fucking chapter with a werewolf.
Yeah.
But I think another reason why it helps in Avatar is because the tonal shift kind of follows the character's development. All of the characters in Avatar, they're little kids. They're actually fairly young children. And despite the fact that they're living in a world that demands they face adult challenges, they still have to act like children sometimes. Whereas as the show goes on, they're maturing, they're kind of leaving those aspects of themselves behind and coming into an adulthood that's forced on them too early. So that tonal shift follows a character development. Once again, in this fic, well, we don't really have much character development other than Octavia's standard loosening up. I don't know if that fits with becoming a werewolf. You might be able to make that argument. I think it's safer to say that they are 2 tropes that are applied in the fic because they're tropes, and the author doesn't understand them well enough to link them.
Yeah, it really does just feel like 2 or 3 different story ideas that are clashing with each other. But unlike, I think we've covered this in a fic before, where we have a story that is trying to be too many things at once, but it's consistent throughout the entire story that there are 2 different ideas that are wrestling with one another. Whereas here, it's more like a relay race, where you have the romantic comedy starting out the race, and then it passes the baton to edgelord near the end.
Illya, anything to add?
It's not the matter of it having a tonal shift, as I think has been said. It's a matter of it having too many. It began to me as a comedy with there may not even werewolves may not have even been anything but myth. It was just a comedy about whether my roommate's a werewolf. And then it switches pretty hard and deep into, yeah, I'm a werewolf and I'm a dangerous werewolf. Just quick. That was a tonal shift. And then it changes from that to, oh, there's a big conspiracy of us all. We're all out there, and we're an organization, and it's a big plot. And then all of a sudden it throws in lichens, and then it turns into a battlefield. So it's not just tonal shift. It's so many different tonal shifts. And I felt betrayed by them because I would get myself into the story and say, okay, we had a little bit of a swap out here and there, but we're running along as a romance now. That's fine. And then that was just sort of ripped away from me. No, we're not going to spend a lot of time with the romance. We're not going to develop the characters. We're just going to have a big battle. I just felt betrayed by it. That was my problem.
I think that's very well articulated, and I think that's a perfect example of what can happen when that author-reader trust is violated. Because when you are a reader, you are trusting the author. If they're going to pull a surprise on you, it's going to be a surprise that, they've thought out carefully, they've taken into consideration how you're going to feel about that surprise, and they're going to lead you into it elegantly. And this author doesn't do that. I think we've established that.
Hello, welcome back. Let me finish my point and then you can go, and then I'll hand over the reins.
Can I ask where we're up to?
Tonal shift.
Okay.
It's others have said it before, but yeah, it's almost just like Whiplash, just going from so fun romantic comedy to Splinter Cell, Crisis Equestria. It was a little too many and too quickly, and I don't think it works. And I think that's all that needs to be said on that. Go ahead, Scribbler.
I wasn't going to get involved in that. I was more that I come back in and thought, oh, how far did they get? You were on the same point as where they left. Okay.
No, we moved down one. We went down one.
We actually did cover,
we started bleeding into the tonal shift from the previous one, but yeah.
I kind of love that. This really is going to be the longest podcast we've ever done because we're nearly at 3 hours and we're at 0.6 of 12. Of 13.
7.
Let's do 7. 6 is done.
6 is done. Let's go to 7 because this is getting long, and I had stuff I wanted to do today.
Okay. Point 7. What is jumping the shark, and is this an example of a story doing it? Narrator, this is your point, so what do you think?
Yes.
Elaborate, bitte.
Oh. Yeah, I think this is a perfect example of a story that just kind of got away from the author. Don't think I'm working under the assumption that this is not the writing process for this particular author was not like my writing process where it's drafting everything down and I'm going to have this chapter and this is going to happen in this chapter and I need to get from here to here, and it's all like outlined extensively before the writing process even starts. And I think this story suffers for it.
Why? Where would you consider to be the point where this fic jumps the shark? And also, actually, what is jumping the shark? For those who don't know, because I had to go off and do actual research
that should
about
be
this.
Explained, yes.
Years ago when somebody first used the phrase. So, Narrator, since it's your point, what does it mean by jumping the shark?
Illya would probably know better than me, but yeah, it was literally an episode in Happy Days where the Fonz jumps the he literally he's still wearing his leather jacket and he jumps, so somebody's towing on the boat and he jumps on, God, why can't I think of the water skis? He jumps on water skis over a pool of sharks, and at that point the show was just, everyone agrees the show just started going downhill at that point. So that's where the trope is the meme actually originates from. So in this story, there were a couple points where it jumped the shark. The major shark jumping moment came when it went all Splinter Cell, and then Octavia blew up the Equestria Daily building, and we at some point we were at
Vinyl blew it up. Octavia was
sorry,
dropping any bombs.
Beg your pardon. Vinyl blew up the Equestria Daily building, and we went from a fun romantic comedy, where, oh gosh, is my roommate a vampire? Well, maybe she is, but maybe she isn't. And then it was all of a sudden we're in domestic terrorism territory. So that's definitely at that point, arguably at the point where Octavia is bitten and becomes a lichen. Also, that was a lesser shark jumping moment.
Illya, where do you reckon the shark jumping moment was? Because your next point was how many damn sharks were there? So clearly you think there's more than one. Where do you think the shark jumping moment? The shark jumping moment. No.
Well, this
Shark
podcast
jumping
jumped the shark now.
Oh my!
Shark jumping Mormons.
That was me completely misspeaking.
The shark jumping Mormons and the leprechaun invasion.
I don't know if I don't think we're supposed to know about them. We better go check the Brobel.
Mommy, please draw art of a shark on water skis jumping over a pit full of Mormons.
Does that mean shark media? The phrase is jumping the Mormon. Oh my god.
Oh man.
Right, so Illya, what's your shark jumping moment?
To me, it was when it changed from a romantic comedy. From a romance. I mean, I was okay with the comedy being gone and them getting more romantic, but to me, the moment came right when suddenly they ran into Luna, and Luna starts leading him into the woods, and she's following behind them, and she's realizing, wait a minute, she's not just a vampire. There's this vampire club. And that, to me, was the jump in the shark moment, because to me, that's when the story was taken away from me. It was removed that they would develop this romance, and we're going to go to an action movie. That's the main one. Now, I saw a lot of other ones in there, like the blowing up of the building, and where it just escalated to crazy amounts. But to me, that was the first shark jump.
What about you, Thornquill? Where do you think the shark jumping moment was?
For me, reading the fic, it was definitely when I realized that Octavia was going to become a werewolf. Because I didn't even... As soon as I realized she got into a cave and there was something in there, I'm like, oh no. There are werewolves in this universe too, and Octavia's going to become one. I think for me, jumping the shark is when you're definitely grasping for ideas to keep something going. And that's what this fic was doing, because it had to bring in ideas out of nowhere to keep going. And also when those ideas feel patently ridiculous to the audience. And that's a bit more subjective. Jumping over a shark in a leather jacket is certainly one of them. Becoming a werewolf in this story felt ridiculous to me. And just because it keeps escalating from there, it continues to feel ridiculous. And I kind of settled into liking it at that point just because I realized, okay, this is the sort of fic where we're just going to keep getting more and more ridiculous. So I didn't have as much of an issue with jumping the shark because this is when it started to get more funny and more enjoyable to me. So maybe it needed to jump the shark. I don't know. Again, it's a tonal shift, and it's going to either make it's going to either make your readers feel betrayed and lost, or it's just going to get ridiculous. The author might be lucky that getting ridiculous worked for some of us.
Goombasa, what do you reckon? Where's your jumping the shark moment?
Well, you see, first the author had an idea, and then they started to write it out, and that was the point. Like, from...
right from the fucking start.
Yeah, point of conception, this story was always destined to just keep jumping that shark. I will say, again, that it only really started to get weird for me when there was that massive tonal shift after... pardon me. After Octavia became a werewolf. From that point onward, like, I knew that this story was not what it was when it started, so I'm pretty sure by that point it had jumped the shark. Other than that, though, like, that was the only real big major one for me.
I reckon the shark jumping moment was where Octavia became a lichen. I could have accepted the inner circle. I could have accepted the plot to kill off all the inner circle. I could actually have accepted the terrorism part, as long as it had got punished at some point and seen the error of their ways. The bit that made me just go, what the fuck are you doing, was when Octavia became part of this night world. And I think it would have been served much better if she'd been an audience surrogate and had stayed a regular pony learning about the night world. It would have given us an in as a reader. And I think that the story lost it when Octavia became a lichen, because suddenly we were having to learn all about lichen stuff and learn about this hidden world at the same time. And it got lost in the muddle, and therefore neither of them got developed properly.
That is such a good point. And I changed my story now to say that was the shark jumping, because I forgot about the fact that we lost control of the narrative there because we didn't have Octavia anymore. You're absolutely right. I take it back.
Well, I'm going to channel Cygnus for a second, where I remember him saying multiple times in different podcasts that all the stories we look at should either be 90% shorter or 90% longer. And I think this is one of those that should be 90% longer. That there were too many bits of the story that needed development or needed to be left out. And I genuinely don't think, apart from the lichen powers healing her when she'd been stabbed in the chest, and the photo of her eating a rabbit, what was the purpose of Octavia being a lichen?
Great question.
It's almost like we're starting to wonder what a good point to end a story is, and how to know when a story has gone on too long. NP, what do you think of that?
Yeah, that's our next point on the podcast discussion doc.
And this is a good example of a story that's gone on too long. And like I think I said it 4 or 5 times in this podcast, we just kind of got away from the author. Sort of, if you have a particular vision in mind, maybe establish that straight at the get-go and make sure that your fic is building towards that every step of the way. That's more or less all I have to say about that.
What about you, Thorny?
Well, part of the point you made was wondering when is the right time to end a story, and I think that's a good question to answer in terms of this fic. Idea bloat is absolutely a thing. When you're discovery writing, when you're just writing out a draft by the seat of your pants like the story was, that can happen very easily. It can happen in world building too, when you're planning and you're just thinking, oh, I can have elves. Oh, well, I can have dwarves too. I can have a race of sentient automatons that have their own planet orbiting the main planet, and that adds this entire other weather system I have to explain, and a gravitational system I'll explain, and your world goes out of control. I think some cues to know when this is happening to your story is to go back and try to pin down what your original idea was, what the core focus of your story was. And a big thing to look at that, to figure that out, is character arc. Where do your characters' arcs take them? And when do they finish? If a character's arc finishes and the story goes on, you're starting to have a problem. I'm sorry, Twilight Sparkle. You're my favorite.
No, that's what I was thinking. It's like, oh, when it gets onto me, I'll say that. But yeah. When your character arc is finished, what is the point of the story carrying on unless you've got another character to focus on? Oh, hi, Starlight Glimmer.
When you're reaching for ideas to try to keep the story going, when you're grasping for new things to try to explore, like secret societies or terrorist plots that had nothing to do with the first part of your story, that can be a warning sign. If you're another big one, and this is where I'll end, because these are just the ones I know. There are probably so many more. But a big one to watch out for is if you start wanting to introduce a new main character and you're more than, halfway through your story or more than 50 to 100,000 words in. If you want to introduce a new character, major, named, they have a massive influence on the plot, and they're in a lot of chapters, and it's the last third of the story or something, like when Silver Streak comes in, that is a major warning sign that your story has gone on too long, and it's kind of this rolling boulder that's starting to destroy more than it's gathering.
Great point.
Does anybody have anything they would like particularly to add to this about where the story should have ended? How do you know your story's gone on too long?
No, I think Thornquill covered it pretty succinctly there.
Yep. Yeah, he loaded it.
Did you just say he haloed it?
No, but I like that better.
He comes in as Master Chief and shoots the thing.
He loaded it up. I mean, he put everything in there that needed to be there. And the only thing I would add is if you're going to have that important character come along 2/3 into the story, you damn sure better foreshadow them. And that can work. If you do properly foreshadow the character, then they can come in and it's not such a shock. And I think that's what should happen.
So our next point is technical issues which take me out of the story. Cell phones and flintlocks. Really? I do not think either was needed, but together they are mutually exclusive. And what does making tea have to do with removing silver from water? And that was Illya's point. So, Illya?
Well, the reason I put that in there is because these things take me out of the story. And I hate anything that takes me out of the story. And I stop and say, what where am I? What story, what universe am I in? Cell phones require so much more technology than ponies have. I mean, you can have the occasional crystal-powered lamp or something, but cell phones? And at the same time they have cell phones, an extremely sophisticated piece of technology, they're using flintlock rifles?
Camcorders.
And what about, what was it? They had Gatling guns there at some point, which... It just, those things bother me because they take me out of the story. And the thing about making the tea to remove the silver from water was just a personal thing because I used to work in a water quality research laboratory. And I realized how silly that is. But the whole point is that things that don't add significantly to the plot, that do take you out of the story, even for a second, are real bugbears to me. I don't like them.
I remember back when it was an amazing revelation to the fandom that ponies had movie theaters.
Yeah, and that was from the Bad Seed song.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's always been a bit anachronistic, how Ponyland works. Ponyland, show my age, that's G1. How Equestria works. I remember writing, truth be told, way back in like 2013. And in that, I through a whole swathes of that story, the vast majority of actually in retrospect, that is set in a hospital. And I had to use phones because I had to have the characters talking to each other at distance and they weren't unicorns. So I gave them very old-fashioned phones, like, you know, the ones that are landlines attached to a wall with cords, and at one point Twilight has to use a payphone that is an old-fashioned one on a wall. And that made more sense to me because Equestria doesn't seem to have technology to that degree, and getting around how to make a medical facility work in a society that doesn't seem to have very advanced technology meant that it had to rely on a lot of magic. I must admit, I kind of like it better when people use the tools that the show has given them to get around the problems of, well, how do we replicate modern society in a society that has fucking magic? No, we'll just put cell phones in. Thornquill?
So this is actually an issue that I struggled with a lot when I started writing Carousel, because I am a bit over neurotic when it comes to these things. I really wish I was cool with just doing a bit more hand waving, but I spent a long time trying to figure out Equestria's precise technology level, because in the show it is all over the map. You've got some really sophisticated stuff like X-ray machines when Rainbow Dash is in the hospital to Firefly-powered lanterns. So authors do kind of have a bit of a broad spectrum to work with in their stories, but Illya is right. The way it's handled in this story is just kind of poor world building, because you can set your story in Equestria and you can do everything from what I did when they're still using gas lanterns to having a form of electricity in some other stories, and even having cell phones. They have cell phones and electricity in university days, and it works fine in that story because the universe has a consistent technology level. Octavia and Vinyl are just, they're meant to be your typical college students on your typical modern day college campus, and the technology level of Equestria kind of adjusts itself to fit accordingly. And since it's consistent, it doesn't bug us as much, unless you really like Equestria being more fantasy oriented and you just don't want technology in your universe, and that's fine. But this story, yeah, it's ridiculously over the map with you using flintlocks, 1800s era technology right alongside 2000s era smartphones. It doesn't feel consistent, and it doesn't feel carefully thought out. It just feels, whatever looks cool, we'll have it in there. Flintlocks look cool, I want those in there.
It felt kind of like I said earlier, and this is not just for this story, this is for a lot of stories that do that anachronism, well, include anachronisms. It feels like it's just whatever the author needs, they choose to put in without thinking whether or not that is consistent with world building. And consistency does seem to be a problem in this story in a lot of ways.
I just wanted to add that something I've said already, that the main point of it was for me, not that it's weird, but that it removes me from the story. When I'm reading a story, I'm in there. I'm in the world and I'm following along these characters. And if I'm taken out of there and yanked back to my own world, that's very uncomfortable.
And do you think it's, is it the inconsistency? Like those two technologies, they just don't appear next to each other, obviously. Or is it the use of modern technology, period, in a story for you?
No, I don't think modern technology in a story would be that big of a deal. If we had seen little hints all along that it might be possible that there were cell phones in Equestria, then if somebody whips one out of a saddlebag, it's no big deal. But for me to just be thinking that this is normal Equestria that we see all the time, you gotta understand, a cell phone's not like a landline. I could take stuff laying around my house and build a working landline telephone. But cell phones are very sophisticated. The technology is sophisticated. So to go to that level of technology, all of a sudden, as a throwaway line, she pulled the cell phone out of her saddlebag, is just too sudden. The world's not built that way that we're in. And that's the part that takes me out.
Yeah, I agree with you.
In university days, I think they got around that by saying that Earth ponies and unicorns have different types of cell phones that are designed. They both run on magic rather than like proper cell phones that we have. But they're designed differently for each type of pony. So they do at least try to adapt it to Pony World. It was still, there were cell phones and texting in Equestria, but I was able to accept it in that story much more because they'd at least thought, well, how would it be different in a world of humanized equines and magic? Whereas that hadn't been done here. It was just, I have a cell phone.
Yeah, it's just careless.
That said, the flintlocks, at least, the Bible does say that they're designed purely for griffins because griffins have claws they can use on the triggers and that kind of thing. I know it's kind of hand-waving it away, but at least there was an attempt.
Yeah, the flintlocks didn't bother me. It was the flintlocks and cell phones together that bothered me.
Yeah.
No, when you put them together, it does become problematic. That seems to be a word that we are throwing around a lot. Inconsistent and problematic. And witty. Are those the three words we're going to use to just sum up this story? I believe so. Thank you, Scribbler. Well, you're welcome, Scribbler. Shall we move on? Technical issue. I was channeling Sean Connery pony there. Technical issues.
Shall we move on?
There can be only one. Technical issues which can't read.
That's the one that we just did.
Is it? Right,
yeah.
Never mind. I'm just going to clip all of my bullshittery out of this. Noting the final bonus chapter, what do we think the author's intent was? Are we being trolled? We don't need that because we have done that.
We've covered that.
Skip it.
There is a corollary to what we've been talking about, and this was added by Cygnus, but he unfortunately couldn't join us today. But I think it would behoove us to at least deal with his point, which is there
It would behoove us?
What?
He made a pun.
Okay,
pun.
I didn't make a horse pun. That is a real fucking word.
Sorry, let's move on. No, I knew it's a real word. I just
okay. I thought I was being mocked. I've lost my thread now. Where was
Corollary.
my fault. I'm sorry.
Thank you. Not your fault. We've been recording for over 3 hours. It's not your fault. I think at this point we're just getting a little bit flibbity gibbet. Excuse me. Yeah. Noting the final bonus chapter. Nope, done that. Fucking hell, I can't do this. Is there really any point in criticizing a story the author appears to have already abandoned for one reason or another? Right, this was Cygnus's point and he's not here, so Goombasa, you get this.
Yes, there is, because even unfinished or not, even if it was written with the intent of trolling, I do think that there is merit in criticizing something, looking at what works or what doesn't. I mean, you can discuss it in terms of its intended purpose. You can discuss a trollfic's purpose as a trollfic, but I do think that there is a point in criticizing a story that is not really written consistently well, because in doing so, people who want to write a story seriously don't make the same mistakes. They don't look at this, miss the fact that it might be a trollfic, and then take that as an example to build off of in the future. Did I make any sense when I talk?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, good. I always worry that I'm jumbling myself up.
You did great.
Sense made Ben has.
Even if you jumbled yourself up, you are so at home in this podcast. You may have noticed that.
Yeah, I feel all warm and fuzzy when I'm around you people.
And that'd be why, even though you had your experiences with Heroic Review, you came back for more punishment in the renewed podcast format. Right, Illya, what do you think?
Well, I just want to say that Cygnus is incredibly good looking and has the voice of a god, and his writings are comparable to Shakespeare. Everyone should go and look at everything Cygnus has ever written or recorded.
We all stand Cygnus.
I only want to add that I think that Cygnus put this point in here because he really didn't want to review the story. It pissed him off so much. So that might have been the impetus for that particular point.
Somewhere Cygnus just got incredibly angry at receiving praise, and he doesn't know why yet.
He feels a disturbance in the force.
He does.
Right. So, do you think there's ever a point where you shouldn't criticize a story? Let's flip this one around then. If there is a point in criticizing a story the author has abandoned, at what point would you think it's not okay to start critically looking at a story?
So long as you keep it civil, I don't think there's never not a time where you couldn't... There's never a time where you could not offer constructive criticism. I don't know how many negatives I put into that sentence.
I will firmly defend anyone and everyone's right to have their story, that they've written in their personal diary, locked in their underwear drawer, safe from criticism. But if you go through the steps of like putting it on the internet, then you are inherently inviting criticism. I think we go out of our way on this podcast not to be too mean, not to be needlessly cruel. We talk about what works and what doesn't work and how we can make things better. But I would say like if this is a very simple equation, like did you put it out there for the public to see? You have invited criticism. Full stop.
Thornquill?
So I think I have, because there were sort of two questions introduced, so I will try to address both as quickly as possible. To your question as to whether or not there are fics that should not be criticized, I'm with NP. Everything is going to be criticized. I will also note that there have been stories suggested for this podcast. I'm not going to name the stories because we chose not to do them. And we chose...
You can say it like, I can edit it out if you want, because you can't say stuff like that, man. I get curious.
If you remember, it was the Enchanted Library that I offered up. And
yes,
we elected...
Yeah.
But so moving back into non-edited territory, we elected not to do that story because we knew from the author's... from knowledge of the author's background that it was an intensely personal story to them, and we were concerned that... It was
to do with mental health, wasn't it? It was a catharsis fic for them to work through their mental health.
Yeah, and even well-meaning and as professional as we get criticism.
We're professionals?
Until the dick jokes come in.
I don't know.
The point being that the criticism might have more of a negative effect on the author than we would want to have. So we have chosen not to review fics for one criteria or another. And as for this fic, I will contest Cygnus. I don't think the author abandoned it. I think they did exactly what they wanted to do. And that's why I think there is value in criticizing this fic, but I think it's limited value because this fanfiction seems to me fairly true to the purpose, or at least one of the purposes of fanfiction. And that to me is just to be able to take whatever ideas you want, have fun with them, throw them out there for someone else to enjoy, and maybe develop your writing. Maybe you can take a story more seriously, or you can just have some ridiculous fun with some ridiculous ideas. And that, I think, is an important facet of fanfiction as distinct from literature, in that I don't think fanfiction has an obligation to be quality. I don't think fanfiction has an obligation to meet anyone's standards. Fanfiction can be purely for the writer's enjoyment and development in the purest sense of art itself. The purest definition of art, in my view, has nothing to do with gatekeeping or quality. Where you get some separation with me is I look at what I think an author was trying to do. If an author was trying to create something profound and meaningful, like Que Sera Sera, I'm going to be a bit harsher because I don't think because of whether or not I think that they met their goal. With this fic, as I've said, I think the author was just trying to have fun with it. So I'm a bit more limited in how I can criticize it. Because what I don't want to do is deny anyone the permission to just go out there and make something for the fun of it because they're scared the quality isn't good enough. I personally do not ever want to advocate for a quality barrier in terms of whether or not someone is allowed to make something or not.
Agreed.
So I think we can learn stuff from this fic, absolutely. But this is one where I think the terms of criticism are shifted a little bit, just because I think it's a different sort of fanfic than we have actually criticized on this podcast thus far. And I am done with my lengthy and long-winded opinion.
Well, I would like to add that as a corollary, that it's okay to put out a crappy story if you enjoy doing it. And I think it's also okay to read and enjoy a story that sucks. I mean, as far as technically. I read a lot of stuff that I realize is crap, but I have a good time with it because it might happen to be something like a human and equestria story with an interesting twist or something. So, yeah, write crap if you want to, because some people like me might even like it.
Crappy HIE fics are definitely my guilty pleasure, so I'm with you there.
There is a reason that the light novel market exists, so yeah.
Yeah.
And I'm not necessarily saying any of us are falling into a gatekeeping trap, but I did want to have that note on this podcast just because, our listeners don't know us as well. And mainly what they're going to hear are the more technical ways we're dissecting this story. And I want that note out there for them as permission to just make whatever you want. That is still there. And none of us on this podcast are trying to negate that.
I think you speak for all of us. Yeah.
Yeah, nobody is a master when they first start out, and you get better with time. And sometimes you just want to do something silly or exercise something. Artists do it all the time. They do little sketches for their own personal notebook. The best quote the best quote I can give for something like that is, "Nobody comes out the pussy drawing fucking Mozart."
Jesus Christ.
Well then,
you're welcome.
Shocking, but perhaps not inaccurate.
Thanks for that. Okay. Any more points on whatever the fuck we were talking about?
On whether or not there's a point to criticizing this.
Yes. Anyone got anything else to add there? All right, let's go on to point 11 then. How would we improve this story if given the chance?
If I were to improve it, I would separate it at the tonal shift, because there are two different ideas here that I do think would work great on their own. But the fact of the matter is that tonal shift there, that sudden jump moment is where it really starts to fall apart for me. And I feel like if the two of them were separated into their own stories, they would both work much better. Or they could take what Thornquill has been saying, go back to the beginning, reread it, and try to weave all of these ideas together a bit more thoroughly. But that I don't know how I would go about the specifics of that, but that is definitely how I think the story could be improved.
Illya?
I think we could possibly do it by making the story a duology or a trilogy. Let the first book be about the romance and Vinyl being a werewolf and them following through and seeing how their romance turns out and their problems with their parents and stuff. And in the second book, perhaps we bring in the conspiracy and all of the other things. And then we might have a final book, Return of the King, where they have the big battle and everything is set right. It would, it'd have to be a lot longer, as Scribbler has suggested it might be, but that could work.
Fair.
I'm back.
Hello, we're just on point 11 there, and this is a good time for you to jump in. How would you improve the story if given a chance?
I would not make Octavia a lichen. I would let her be the
Yes.
audience surrogate, and I would keep everything else largely intact, but I would go back and rewrite the first bit to make sure that the tone matched that of the latter chapters, and I'll probably insert bits here and there to give them some slice of life development that didn't rely on banana jokes.
Yeah.
Yeah, more than anything, I would absolutely not have. To be honest, I'd probably erase the idea of like fairies and lichens and things and just have it be an underground vampire society.
Yeah. I don't think the story would have suffered over much if that had been the case.
Yeah, I genuinely just didn't see the point. Other than, yay, Octavia is a lichen now, that means she's a superpowered person, blah, blah, blah. I didn't see the point. I think that Octavia was much better served by being an ordinary pony sucked into an out of the ordinary world.
Yeah.
And if you're going to do a cliche, you may as well do that one.
I really expected him to make her a vampire. I'm surprised that didn't happen. That's all they needed, just to make her a vampire.
I suppose, but I still like the idea of keeping her as an audience surrogate, where she is the normal one asking questions that we need answers to facilitate the world building.
Right. Thorny?
I think for me, this question goes much further into basics, pertaining to what I said earlier about why you're writing fanfiction. If all you're writing fanfiction for is for your own enjoyment, honestly, do whatever you want. If you want, if you want your fanfiction to work better with audiences and whatnot, and you're actually trying to go for improving your writing skills, or you want to, put something meaningful into community, whatever you're up to, do this story, and it's your first draft. Then set it aside for at least 2 weeks, possibly up to a month, if you're more patient than me. Then come back and reread it, and then revise it. Because I think you can have all the ideas that the author has in this story in a story and make it work. I think you can have your lichens, you can have your secret societies, you can have your romance, but you can make it a lot more consistent. And after that, if you really want to go the full 9 miles and you really want to try to really start improving your work, find beta readers, either ones you can trust or complete strangers, because they'll give you harsh feedback. Let them read the draft and hear what suggestions they have to say. Decide whether or not to discard their feedback and revise your story again. And once you have done that, you will have most of the stuff that's in this story. You might have had to kill 1 or 2 darlings, but you'll have something that reads a lot more consistently. You won't have betrayed your readers by constantly switching genre and tone on them and breaking that level of trust. And you'll just have something that flows a lot better, and it will ultimately be a lot more true to your vision. That is probably what I would prescribe as a baseline writing process if you want to aim for a different level of quality. Again, I don't want to be drawing judgmental barriers between real fan fiction and not good fan fiction. It's all fan
We're not
fiction.
the gatekeepers of stuff like that.
Yeah. But
to be honest, there shouldn't really be any gatekeepers. If you're doing it for fun and it's a fan fiction, then go ahead, do it.
Yeah, but like I said, if you want to do more and you want to get your fic, I can't do this without such prescriptive language as a higher level. But basically, if you want to improve your quality, that is the process that I would prescribe.
I would say that's definitely a way to mature your writing. When people are doing stuff just for fun, you can just throw shit at the wall and see what sticks. That is the entire premise of Aprilverse.
Yep.
But, I mean, Aprilverse was written in, just over a week. So it was not going to get that kind of thorough reading and rereading. But then again, with something like that, it didn't really need it. Whereas something more like Heteropaternal Superfecundation, that's more something that you're pouring your heart and soul into, and therefore you do want to go through a writing process to make sure the writing is mature enough to deal with that kind of topic. And I think sometimes it's horses for courses.
Pretty much.
I hadn't realised I'd made another pun.
Yeah. I was sitting here thinking, did she?
No, it didn't. I'm ignorant. That's why I keep sending porn to people. I'm just ignorant. Okay. Sorry, I was distracted because there's a badger still in the garden. When I ran off before, it was because we've got a baby fox in the area, and we've also got a badger, and they turned up at the garden at the same time, and the badger attacked the fox. So I had to run out and scare the badger to make him let him go.
Just got to break up a badger and fox fight, because that's
Sounds like a North Korea
Scribbler life.
cartoon.
Yeah.
More mushrooms.
Right. Vampires in fiction. What is the right way to do them? And likewise, werewolves. Now, I have a vested interest in this because, as I've said before in this podcast, supernatural and specifically urban fantasy, they're my favourite genres. I love them. But that means that I read a lot of vampire and werewolf fiction, like an absurd amount. Some of it is classic, some of it is not. Some of it is good, some of it is really not. That means that I have a very wide pool of knowledge for, vampires are different trope. And for that reason, I hate Twilight for its writing style, but I don't think that the sparkly vampire thing is necessarily a bad trope, because at the very least, it was trying to do something new with tired old cliches of vampires. That does mean I'm willing to give any vampire story a chance to see what that author can do with them. That said, there are still certain things I would like to see in my vampire fiction. And one is I would kind of like some kind of either make them unrepentantly evil or give them a moral conflict. Because how the hell did Vinyl Scratch cope before there were blood bags? Does anybody else have an opinion on how the vampires and the werewolves are written in this story compared to other fiction? Goombasa.
It's very straightforward with its portrayal. Like there are no real surprises here, to the point where until we get to the point where everybody starts fighting with each other, doesn't really feel like it makes much of a difference other than like the blood bags that Vinyl keeps in the apartment and things like that, which is why I feel like the romantic comedy angle has a lot of wasted potential here, because it doesn't really explore what modern day life is like for somebody who has to hide that sort of thing from everyone else.
Like What We Do in the Shadows.
Yeah, that's actually a good example. Another really good example is, did anybody else here watch the 1980s version of The Twilight Zone?
Yeah.
There was an episode about an old man who was a vampire, and he makes friends with a kid in the neighborhood that he moves into, who somehow figures out that he's a vampire, and the two of them have a lot of conversations about what being a vampire is like. And he says, we can eat garlic, we can be out in the sun and whatnot. We can drink blood, but it's not super necessary. And then we get the big reveal about why vampires need to move around a lot and need to keep themselves from being discovered in that particular interpretation of it. Because vampires who are around humans for too long cause the humans to get infected with a disease that transforms them into monsters with a bloodlust for vampires.
Oh, that's a nice idea.
That is so Twilight Zone.
The whole tragedy of it, too, is that the reason that the old man tells the kid all of this is because he came there to die. He wanted to wait until everybody turned into monsters and murdered him because he was tired of living. It was actually a pretty depressing episode.
Oh.
That's
quite sad.
The 1980s Twilight Zone was a little bit underrated, I think.
Yeah, I think a lot of shows like Tales from the Crypt and things, there were a lot of good one-off episodes in those. Narrator, what do you think?
I have very little to add on this point, I'm sorry.
You don't have to apologize. Illya.
Well, I don't have a great range of experience with vampire stories. I've seen probably half to a dozen different things. One thing that I've found in what I've watched and read is I don't really enjoy stories where there are vampires and werewolves in the same story. It seems distracting. I didn't even really enjoy it in Buffy that much. I didn't think they needed werewolf angles in there it was well done because of Joss Whedon, but I still found it a little bit superlative. I mean, a little bit too much. And the same thing in Twilight. I would have preferred in Twilight for it just to have been vampires and no werewolves. I'm sorry, it's just me.
You did find it interesting though, because vampires and werewolves actually came from the same legend. Like they have the same original root.
I don't doubt it. I just prefer one or the other. The right way to do them. Well, I think for one thing, I prefer that you have good vampires and bad vampires. I think that makes a nice dynamic that I enjoy in everything that I watch. And I think you need to take vampires and put them into ordinary situations and see how it plays. That's a lot of fun. Like in Buffy, you've got vampires in a high school. That's basically it. High school setting with monsters. That was fun. I enjoy that. One of my favorite television shows was Moonlighting. It only lasted for one season, but it was about a vampire who was a detective, and that was a lot of fun. And he had good and bad vampire friends. It only lasted a season. They didn't develop it that well. But taking the vampires, putting them into an everyday situation and watching what happens and having good and bad vampires, to me, that's the way I like it. I don't know if it's right or wrong.
Very much in the vein of like True Blood. There were good and bad vampires in that, and they looked in more detail about the morality of it.
Exactly. True Blood was a good example of that.
I think it boils down to there's no traditionally right way of doing vampires. People tend to lean back on the old Dracula ideas. Although that said, most people misinterpret Dracula and go for things that have since been added to the Dracula story by like the stage play or the films or modern interpretations that just weren't in the original book. And I find that fascinating when you start looking at like the origins of certain famous vampires. But I do think that in today's kind of sodden market, especially post-Twilight, there were so many vampire stories that if you're going to do it, you need to do something original with it. And this story, I felt like the vampire aspect could have been any monster. It wasn't unique enough to vampires for it to matter that Vinyl was one. Other than the bit where she bites Octavia's throat to drink her blood, there is no distinction between Vinyl and any other pony except she's got more strength. She could have been a superhero. She could have been a werewolf. She could have been a fairy in disguise. She could have been a mutant. She could have been anything, and it would have had exactly the same amount of emphasis on the story. And that's what I don't like about vampire fiction. If you're going to put them in there, do something with the concept of a vampire.
You're right. We got more about her being a vampire in the description of the story than we did the story itself, really.
Yeah. So and that bothered me. I think it was that scattershot notion of this story that it was very inconsistent, and when it jumped about and found a plot it wanted to go with, it was unfortunately still dragging behind the last vestiges of all the plots it had dropped. And Vinyl's vampirism was one of them. Unless anybody has anything else they'd like to say, final thoughts. For all its problems, some acknowledged by the author directly, is this fandom classic worth reading? Because this is the first fandom classic we've done on this podcast. Do we think it's worth people going and spending their hard-won time reading it? Goombasa?
I do think that it is worth reading if you go into it forearmed with the knowledge that it goes in a lot of different directions. Because if you're not prepared for the shift, it's going to seem a little bit off-putting, especially for how drastic that shift is. I do also think it's worth reading just because of how much spawned from this idea. I had never read the fic before this podcast, but I was well aware of Vinyl Scratch being a vampire being a tried and true trope. I had seen comics based around it, parodies of this story before I had read the original story, both dark and comedic. There was a lot that came from this idea. It might not have necessarily been directly inspired from this story, but the concept spawned a lot of interesting stuff going forward. Not so much the whole Octavia being a lichen thing, but definitely Vinyl being a vampire.
Illya?
No. It's not worth reading for me. As a matter of fact, if we hadn't been reviewing this story, when it made the big tone shift, I would have just quit reading it, and I would not have missed anything at all. It wouldn't, it was nothing for me in the latter half of it. But that's not to say that that would be true of everyone. If you like big action-packed thrillers, it might be worth reading.
Neighrator?
This one to me was more of a more of a miss than a hit as a fandom classic. For me personally, I think a lot of people, Scribbler included, really enjoy the story, especially in parts. But for me, I would pass.
Well, I enjoyed bits of it, but not the whole. That's like you're saying I enjoy the icing on a cake, but not the cake underneath, because the cake underneath was made from worms and mouse dung.
Jesus, okay.
That's a hell of a cake.
It's a Scribbler special.
Oh my god.
Thornquill, what do you think? Not of the cake, of the story.
Yeah, no cake for me, please. Death. I'm glad someone else got that.
There I go again.
The cake is a lie.
Oh god.
So this one is kind of hard for me because based on my understanding, or rather I should say my belief of why the author wrote it, I can't be too harsh on it. However, would I actually go out and tell someone else to spend their time and read it? I don't think it's so hard. To say what people would enjoy, but myself, I don't think it's that enjoyable to the average reader. I don't think it's aged well, mainly. I think when people were reading this and the tropes of Octoscratch were everywhere, and everyone just wanted more Octoscratch, and everyone kind of knew by assumption what was going on, the author could get away with not doing much original. I don't have... Now that it has aged, I don't think it stands too well on its own without all that other media propping it up. And the fact that it constantly references and lifts from those other ideas doesn't help it. The fact that it makes in-jokes to epic wub time ages it very terribly. And it does have good moments. It has really good, strong dialogue in some sections, and there are some moments that I did genuinely laugh at. But on the whole, the erratic pacing is very hard to get through at the first point. Illya asked the question, would we have finished this story if not obligated to do so for the podcast? Personally, if I'm being honest, I probably would have stopped maybe even before the halfway point, just because I didn't see the author promising me that things would get better. And I never would have gotten even to the good parts. So if I had to recommend, I would say if you really want to see where a trope originated from, and you can get to the good moments, go for it, but be warned, it has not aged well. There's a lot of stuff in there that's just going to make you go, what the fuck? Why? What am I in? What is happening? And
well said, Tony.
Yeah, I'm absolutely not saying that the story should not exist or that it should not have been written. But as for whether I would recommend other people go out and read it, really oscillating for me, but I do settle on no.
I think it's your mileage may vary on this one. It's not quite into the Room or Birdemic levels of so bad it's good. It is a curiosity of early fandom. And I think that because of some of the impact it's had as a fandom classic and the things that it's inspired and that it's propagated in the idea of vampirism and Vinyl Scratch being a secret vampire and all the things we discussed, I think it's worth a look, but it's 54,000 words. So if you're going to have a look, either be a speed reader or be prepared for a bit of a slog before you get to things that you might enjoy. And because it's your mileage may vary, it may not be that you enjoy the same things that we did. It may be you hate the stuff that we did. It may be that you don't enjoy any of it. It may be you just read it and then go, well, I wish they'd talked about this, this, and this. I very much think that this is a story that's going to inspire different feelings in different people. Right. We have been them's Writing Words. We hope that you will we hope that you will join us next time. I nearly said dissect us next time. That was that would have been a bit of a different podcast.
Are we not going to spin the wheel?
We are.
I think that's next.
Okay.
Like I was buying time so I could load up the wheel.
As it turns out, the reviewers reacted very negatively to this review of a fandom classic and proceeded to butcher the reviewers.
And this would be the real reason that Cygnus said, I don't think I'll be in this one. One tick. Ah! I accidentally spun the wheel and deafened myself.
Well done.
You okay?
Oh dear.
Who is eligible at this point?
We're fairly close to the beginning of a new cycle, so I think most of us are.
Yeah, I think
we're
everyone
on.
in here.
It's everyone in here minus me. Right, okay. Because if I recall, we're only doing people who are in the current podcast.
Yes.
Right. Just realised I've loaded up this thing and I've written it Thonry instead of Thorny. Sorry about that.
Happens a lot.
So, that means that when I screenshot it, I apologise. I didn't realise I'd spelled your name wrong before I copy-pasted. It's spinning. It's spinning. It's...
And the winner is
The winner is Thonry. It is in fact.
Thorny.
How did I know?
Yeah. Well, that means you get to pick, even though I put your name wrong. It's all right. So, Thorny Thonry, what are we having next time?
Okay, because one of the ones I was reviewing fell through completely for various reasons, going to a different standby, and it is going to be a complete genre shift for us, and it actually should be fairly quick. I'm pulling a Cygnus. Fic I am choosing is called Blue Skies Bring Tears, and that is by A Hoofful of Dust, who,
Ooh, I like that
if
author.
anyone knows that author,
I do know the author.
beautiful stuff.
Yeah, very poetic. Right, so next time... Oh, by the way, how long is that story?
That is 1,498 words, so much shorter.
Oh,
Somewhat
good.
different than Mattress.
Only 5 hours for that one then.
Oh, yeah.
Jesus Christ.
This one has, in fact, got to 3 hours and 56 minutes at this point.
Is that the record? Did we do it?
This is a record at this point, yes. This is how... And this is without, like, any ending diatribe or beginning diatribe. This is purely the podcast itself. And we
We
don't
knew
even,
it
like,
would be.
have to break for bathrooms or things. So, like, this is the entire discussion.
Yeah.
This review is longer
Wow.
than Avengers.
Oh my god.
And not nearly as emotionally heartbreaking. More dick jokes, though.
Correct.
That said, that's America's ass. Sorry, I went to see it on Friday. It's like, oh, my heart, it's not quite it's broken now. I don't want to say anything because anybody else in here hasn't seen it. Go and fucking see it so I can talk about it with you. We have been Them's Writing Words. I have been Scribbler. Let's say goodbye to our wonderful cast members who are probably questioning their life choices quite a lot at this point. Goombasa.
Thank you all for sticking with us this long. You're so wonderful and patient.
Or, insane. Illya.
Goodbye, my friends.
Neighrator.
Good night, everybody.
Thornquill. Or Thonry, I should say.
What the fuck are you all still doing here? Go turn off your computer, go outside, hug a loved one, and do something else, for God's sake, off the internet. Thank you so much, and goodbye.
And I have been Scribbler. Please go and read some good vampire fiction. Maven of the Eventide has lots and lots of recommendations. Go and watch her channel. We thank you for joining us, and goodbye. Be lovely to each other, and good night. Bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
I have to go places and take a bath first, so I'm going to leave.
Yeah.
I also am going to log off this exact second. This has been
Yeah,
fun.
Yeah,
Great
it's
talking
been
to you.
really long.
Yeah, Midori has been in this room very quiet and very patient this
Oh my
entire
good
time.
god! Midori! When you don't read the story, you don't have to do this!
No one told her. Oh no.
I'll let her. I'll let her know she's got headphones on right now.
Okay, I had visions of her sitting there. What?
All right. Goodbye, everybody.
God. Bye!
Bye bye.